And welcome everybody to the interview room on this wonderful Sunday evening. We are so excited to have you here, and we're excited to have some wonderful guests and friends for quite a few years. And Karen, what do we got going on here tonight? Who's with us?
Well, thanks everybody for being here. We have a true crime extravaganza for you. We've got Linda from It's a Crime, and we are so excited to have her here. And thank you all of your followers, your viewers, your subscribers to be here with us. And of course, we have the wonderful Dr. Gary Brucato also with us. Chris is holding up his book. If you're not familiar with it, it's called The New Evil. And we have links in the description below to Gary's book and also to subscribe to Linda's channel. So get over to that link and get over to It's a Crime, subscribe to Linda's channel. And we are so glad you guys are here with us tonight. This is a true crime extravaganza is what we're calling it. We've got such great information for you tonight. We're super excited. We're going to get in and talk about the Barry Morphew arrest. And but first, we absolutely want to thank our subscribers, our Patreon members. Thank you so much for your support. And also our mods. We love these women. They work so hard for us. We've got Miss Sophia, Maui Girl, Mimi J2, Laura Waldy, and Teresa M. So thank you, ladies, for all you do.
Grateful. And if you're here from It's a Crime, thank you for being here. We are grateful. But Linda has coined so many terms with Bear and Lolo from Lori Vallow. And we just thought it would be so much fun to have Dr. Gary in the house to give us some psychological background. And if we missed something, then we thought Miss Linda could connect all those dots. And I don't know about you guys, isn't it exciting to see her streaming all the time? I mean, it's pretty fun. And Karen and I just absolutely think it's a wonderful thing. So welcome this evening. We'll start ladies first. Miss Linda, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Gary, how's it going down there in the lower left-hand corner? We got the ladies up top.
Going well. It's a little too hot in New York. And of course, you know, there are some crazy things going on in the news that have us all on the edge of our seats. But other than that, everything's going well. I must say I was surprised when I got a notification on my phone that this arrest happened, and we were wondering what was going to happen. Then all of a sudden, here we are. There was an arrest. It came right out of left field. Did you expect it like that? Just popped right up?
No, I think it was. I think everybody kind of went, "Whoa, where'd that come from?"
And you know, we've been following it, and we had been periodically checking in with the 12th judicial district, the county attorney over there. You know, after Suzanne's remains were found, that was way back in September of 2023. We would reach out to them, and you know, a year goes by, 2 years goes by, and somehow you just think, are they ever going to make an arrest? Are they ever going to be solving this? And then you just get so busy with all the other cases we're working on. And then all of a sudden, one day, blam, you get a notification on your phone and there's been an arrest. So.
Yeah. Linda, did you know? Did you have any inclination that it was coming this quickly?
No, but many viewers always ask, hey, what's going on with the Suzanne Morphew case? What's happening with that? What's going on with Bear? And Karen, it's bam, not blam.
Exactly. Oh, that's so good.
So here's the lineup. I think that we just kind of want to explore together. So we've got the indictment. Everybody's read the indictment. You know, we know now there are some things that were kind of a bombshell inside of this indictment that everybody kind of looked at. And then I've got like just a brief video that I put together of a trip that we had gone out there. I thought it would be fun to have Dr. Gary kind of weigh in on some of the personality type we may be looking at here with, you know, Bear, but recognizing, of course, this is not an official diagnosis of him because he's not sat down with him as a forensic psychologist or anything, but this is what he does on a daily basis. He goes in and he talks to people in the jails. He does psychological assessments for the courts and et cetera, et cetera. So I thought it would be fun for all of us here for him to kind of weigh in. Those of you who are, members of our channel and have been for quite some time know that Dr. Gary nailed the personality type for Brian Koberger long before he was ever taken into custody. So I just thought it would be kind of fun, but simultaneously, obviously on a serious note, I want to talk about also the danger of these types of personalities and where women are at a place where they're about ready to pull the trigger and separate, and they find themselves captured within a situation like Suzanne was, and that kind of thing too. So there's a lot of things I feel I'd want to go. What do you guys think about that plan? And we can go any direction you want. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, I'm on board with whatever you're doing.
Okay. Karen, any thoughts, hon?
Yeah, maybe we could just recap the facts for people who are just joining us or haven't caught the news in the past couple of days, just to kind of get them up to speed before we dive in, and we can look at that video and just off to the races, if you will.
Awesome. What do you got?
Okay, so just kind of a recap. So Barry Morphew was arrested Friday in Gilbert, Arizona. And Linda we have some comments about what is going on in Gilbert, Arizona, because as you true crime lovers know, we just finished with Lori Daybell, her trial, and Gilbert, Arizona was right there in the mix. So anyway, not to mix too many cases up here, but so Barry he was arrested Friday. This is for the second time, if you're not aware of that, and we'll get to that. And he is he waived extradition. So he is going to be picked up and returned to Colorado to face the charges. It's not just first-degree murder. I think it's tampering with a body, tampering with evidence, and a few other related charges as well. Now, if you need to have your memory refreshed on the Suzanne Morphew case, back in May of 2020, on Mother's Day is when she was reported missing. But back in a year after that, so May of 2021, literally on the anniversary of Suzanne's 1-year disappearance and presumed killing, Barry was arrested in Chaffee County. And actually, Chris and I were there that day when he got arrested. And I remember there was the press conference outside the courthouse. And so they arrested him in connection to her murder. So fast forward a year in 2022, on the eve of his murder trial, charges were dismissed with prejudice, which meant that they could come back. The door was open. They could come back anytime and charge him again for murder at a later time. So that was in 2022. In September of 2023, Suzanne's remains were found when authorities were out in this rural area in Moffat County, and they literally stumbled upon her remains in a shallow grave. And that was Moffat County. That was about 30 or 40 miles away from where Suzanne and Barry Morphew lived in Salida, Colorado, their big, beautiful home. And so now we are 2.5 years later, after Suzanne's remains were found, that the DA has a grand jury returned an indictment on Barry, again for first-degree murder. So that's the second time he was arrested. So the grand jury indicted him on Wednesday. He was arrested Friday in Gilbert, Arizona. Now, in between all these just basic facts of the case, there has been so many twists and turns along the way, and drama and dramatic moments. And we're going to get into that and talk about that.
Yep. Linda, did we miss anything?
No, you did an awesome job.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
All
you.
right.
There's a lot of
so-
moving parts with this.
It
so,
is. It's
yeah.
been a lot. There's a lot of details.
Yeah.
And okay, so let's start with Dr. Gary. First of all, you've done a little homework here. You've got the book, The Most Evil. Where does he fit in what category does, and we're going to use Linda's term, where does Bear fit there in The Most Evil?
Doubt it could be more horrifying than that rhyme. But basically, first of all, it's impossible to say without additional information. But generally speaking, if it turns out that he is guilty of this crime, generally with these kinds of cases, we're looking at something like category 9, 10, or 11 on that scale. So I'll explain very briefly. One of the primary motives for these kinds of killings is jealousy or anger at one's partner, for feeling slighted, narcissistically wounded, that you're moving on with somebody else. Somebody doesn't think you're the greatest thing in the world. And so there can be either an impulsive jealousy killing, which places you much lower on the scale, or one can be with a more aberrant, nasty personality. One can do it in a way that is a lot crueler, where there can be a kind of symbolism to the crime. For example, the potential use of an agent that would paralyze somebody. One might think about the symbolism of, you made me feel that way, right? You made me feel kind of helpless, and as a consequence, you now feel vulnerable and helpless. Or you might think about the idea of kind of utterly humiliating somebody by leaving their body out, in a shallow grave to be discovered, or something like that. Now, you can also see what I've called in the literature elimination murder in these kinds of crimes, which is where the motive is more about getting somebody out of the way for a practical reason, like money, or because you want a new romance, or they're in the way. So that's generally what we're going to be looking at in these kinds of domestic situations or with partners. Now, what's interesting is that almost invariably with these kinds of offenses that fall into 9, 10, and 11, you see staging of the crime in some way to give the impression that an outsider came along and just did something to harm the victim. And of course, the person, not being a professional, doesn't know to stage a robbery or to stage an SA or anything that would explain why a random person would target you. And so we see things like, the overturned bike, randomly, and things like that to give an impression like that. But I have to tell you, like, that those are just so typical in category 9, 10, and 11 offenses. The only difference between 10 and 11, incidentally, they're both elimination murders, but in category 10, the person is not a psychopath. They're not as sophisticated. I would place Lizzie Borden, I believe, is guilty in that category, on category 10, because the motive was to get people out of the way for money and escape her home. But category 11, you'd have to be much more reptilian, callous psychopath to be there. And the kinds of killings that you see in that category are especially cruel, unnecessarily cruel. So that it's not enough to just shoot a person. You would have to do something that borders on a kind of, like, it comes closer to a kind of psychological torture or massive humiliation or things like that. And I have to say that if he is guilty, the use of the tranquilizer agent, I think, is pretty nasty and unnecessary cruelty. When I read that in the indictment, it gave me chills. I mean, and I've seen everything, but the notion of somebody being completely helpless and conscious, potentially, is very difficult to sort of fathom, and I think starts to border on the type of crime that I would call evil, right? Because of the extra unnecessary element to simply remove somebody from this world that you're. So it also suggests, of course, a great deal of anger where you need to do something so far. And we see that kind of excessiveness in people that know you personally or people that have a fantasy about you. Serial killers do that because they're projecting onto you that you are this kind of character that they've imagined, and they need to play this thing out over and over. But when it happens in domestic situations, it suggests extreme, like a kind of a humiliation or rage, where you've got to go overboard to level the playing field against the person. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But that really did give me chills. I'm aware of thousands of crimes. I was looking in my databases. There aren't too many in which people are given agents that paralyze them like that. So did you guys get the chills from that too? I mean, it's pretty creepy stuff.
Yeah, and Karen and Linda jump in, pepper him with questions, because he's the guy. He's the man. You know.
I have two questions, if that's okay. Yeah, to answer your question, yes, for sure, especially because she was very petite, and how this, they don't, I mean, it doesn't even happen on humans until now. But I have a question about your staging pattern, that you were talking about staging the bike, which made me think of staging potentially the area, because from the indictment, sorry if I'm bringing this up prematurely, but in the indictment, it said that basically it's not the original position. So
Right.
Would you say that this, whoever did it, staged the bike, and it's no surprise that also that staged where she finally was?
Right. It's a common part of staging to move the body from one place to another. For example, you might have a case where you're trying to make it appear that somebody committed suicide, but you've actually killed them. So you move them to a different part of the house. You do something to make it look like they shot themselves or hanged themselves, but in fact they've been eliminated somewhere else in the home, or moving them to taking them in a van somewhere else and stay. So the whole point of staging is that in order to throw off law enforcement and anybody that sees it, you do whatever in your mind is necessary to set up the situation. And this has to be distinguished from the behavior that we see in more fantasy-driven offenders, which might be called posing, where for sexual or fantasy reasons you set the body up a certain way or to be humiliated in a sexualized way or whatever. This looks more like, I want to give the impression that somebody is riding around on a bike and is just sort of snatched or knocked off the bike or something like that. And it's not uncommon in a kind of unsophisticated person that is arrogant and thinks they're going to throw off professionals, because they don't think of things like bug larvae and stuff that, I mean, in the foundation Chris and I are in, we have people that are like the top in their fields in these things. And, if you were to take a case with this kind of story to that team, one of the first things they would ask is, what about the bug larva? Like, we'll be able to tell, like, we've looked at cases where we think that a body was moved across state lines because of the insects. That you can tell those larvae simply don't come from that part of the country. This person came from, So, and I know the larvae figure into this story, right? That's one of the things that's come up. So what's also horrifying.
Let's take a look at that. That's a good segue into it. And Karen, Karen, what struck you about this? Let me. Can you guys all see that? Do I need to make it a little bit bigger? Hang on. Okay, so it says board certified forensic anthropologist, a botanist, an entomologist, all analyzed the remains, and several observations were noted. Okay, so you've got somebody that looks at bones, you've got somebody that looks at plants and brush, and then you've got somebody that looks at bugs such as larvae, etc. And they all analyzed not only the remains but the crime scene where she was discovered. There was a distinct lack of bug activity, which was inconsistent with the remains having decomposed at that location. So right off the bat, they're telling the public here that, look, there's a problem with the geographic region where she was found, and that displaying itself on her body. So that's number one. How did that strike you ladies when you first heard about that?
Well, for me, it wasn't surprising just based on what we knew, some of the behind the scenes type information, if you will, maybe not officially released by Chaffee County at the time, but it doesn't surprise me with the background information that we had at the time. Linda, what do you think? What was your reaction when you read that?
Yeah, I agree. Just from the last 5 years of looking into this, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, especially she wasn't found and, all these things, and the way that he was talking on some of his interviews and whatnot, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And
Gary,
so,
wait, Chris, I just had a question for Gary just about that tranquilizer aspect. So, Gary, do you think that she was, so he shoots the dart with the tranquilizer and it paralyzes her from what we understand. Was that what killed her? Or do you think he came in with something additional while her body was paralyzed?
It's impossible to say based on available information, unless you guys know something that I don't know. But I think that what we have, if this is the guilty party, has a kind of a twisted symbolism to it that is important to think about. The quieting of a person, the rendering them completely helpless, and the part that I think is also extremely symbolic is that the evidence suggests to me the possibility that this person was retained before being dumped somewhere, so that the symbolism is something like, I own you. You can't leave me. You're helpless and you're stuck and you're staying with me. And it's only when it gets to the point that I have to get rid of you that I dictate when you leave, that kind of thing. So that the whole thing smacks of controlling somebody that you feel is dumping you. So you dump them, literally. And, and the idea is deeply, deeply disturbing, because what it has at its center is somebody, I think, profoundly sensitive to humiliation. That's the whole thing. So that you have to take it an extra step. It isn't enough, like you see in a lot of these situations, where the person, shows up someplace and says, I loved you, how dare, and shoots you, and then shoots themselves or something like that. When you start to see that extra stuff, you have to start thinking, wow, this person, brooded a long time about how to meticulously do this. And so that use of the tranquilizer thing becomes extremely disturbing, and I think says something about a very particular personality. The other thing I hasten to add to what I said earlier is that in the types of personalities that stage, like that you see in elimination murders, for example, that I talk about in The New Evil under a different name, I hadn't named it yet. One thing you also see is manipulating the public with a lot of crocodile tears. So, like, remember the Susan Smith case, where she created the story that an African-American man pulled up and took the car and took the children away? Another classic case of this type. Of course, it was a complete stranger, and it was the elimination murder to get rid of somebody in the way, two kids in the way of a romance. And in that story, you remember the crocodile tears, right? Going on the news and people looking at her saying, she looks like she's crying, but there's no tears coming out of her face, out of her eyes. Well, I think, I was very interested in those, that, like, please come home, we miss you so much, honey, darling, kind of thing, which, it's interesting to think about that if he's guilty, that extra unnecessary step of trying to look like you deeply care also is very disturbing. But again, I'm a big, let's let the case be adjudicated. But if he's guilty, a lot of that stuff it really is creepy, disturbing stuff.
And 1 second for every year of marriage was the plea, 25 seconds.
wow.
Yeah, well, but did you guys also have that feeling watching that it felt that it didn't feel, I don't know, authentic?
Yeah, no, he was a phony from day one. I mean, I think the very first, when he presented that, was there a lion? Was there a mountain lion and all this other stuff? And Linda, you tore that stuff apart.
Yeah.
I mean,
I went a little extreme on him.
No, it was amazing. It was amazing. I mean, you know, Karen and I were like, yes, that's go.
So no, I was just going to say what was disturbing though. The worst part is the way he said the mountain lion just dragged her up the hill. And as a human, is to hear like, oh my gosh, like the way he's wording that and describing the mountain lion potentially dragging her up the mountain like it was, did you have cereal for breakfast or did you have eggs? It was that.
Well, doesn't it smack of somebody who sees the victim as an animal and himself as an animal, as a ferocious animal? It's very interesting, incidentally, beyond the fact that the word lion is a pun on lying. It's interesting that lions, if a male lion smells on a female that she has been with another male, he kills the entire pride. He kills the children and all of them, because the idea is that she's been unfaithful and the cubs are tainted potentially by the other male. I just found that imagery disturbing. I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but it's one of those little coincidences that make life interesting.
And what I have to say was really interesting for me and probably Chris as well, is that we heard the story, his plea on that video that he did, the mountain lion story, and then we traveled back to Indiana, to the place where it all began, where he and Suzanne met in high school. This was kind of a budding romance, and then they dated when they were in college, et cetera, et cetera. And to go back and to hear from the people closest to Barry Morphew growing up that he was an avid hunter, but he wasn't a hunter. He skinned alive. Chris, what was that?
Raccoons.
The raccoons, right?
And
he sold their pelts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And hunting was his life. And you hear all these details about that, and then you kind of put it with the facts that we knew going on, and so this really disturbing profile starts to emerge. And it doesn't surprise me that we now have this set of facts after all this 5 years later, and all these things are coming out. So it's really interesting to kind of see all this kind of come together.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into, and we'll come back to the dump site here and where she was ultimately discovered. But I want to kind of pick Dr. Brucato's brain with Linda and Karen here. That let's take you back to just a brief piece of a video that we did, but I wanted to do a suspectology. Dr. Brucato has not seen this, but when we were up there, I kind of laid out where he grew up and where his hunting grounds were in his high school. So this is just a brief couple minutes. We'll do a stop-start and get your opinions.
I'm in Anderson, Indiana, hometown of Barry and Suzanne Morphew. Okay. I'm actually standing in front of the church they were married in, the Grace Baptist Church. How did a marriage of Barry and Suzanne, that love story, turn into such a tragedy where Suzanne now has been missing? Well, I'm about ready to tell you. Take a seat. So I'm standing here at Barry Morphew's house where he grew up. At this house, as you can see, where the trailer is, okay, is the boyhood home of Barry. Next to that, the other White House, that is where Trevor Noel's house was.
Linda, why was Trevor so important, do you think, in this play?
Well, from what I remember of Trevor, he was the one in the beginning that, did he not? Correct me if I'm wrong. He set up the GoFundMe and also encouraged the 25-second plea video.
Yeah,
correct?
right, Karen? I mean, he was the cover play,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it just so happens that White House, he is his house next to Barry. So he's been covering for him from day one. So Gary, first question. What do you think about the geographical location here in relationship to his boyhood and growing up in this particular region?
Well, what is that in the area, sort of at the top there? Is that just barren land? Is there forest? I mean, what do you have around him?
It's all farmland, all farmland.
So
And
how
the
isolated
trees are a
is he?
windbreak. The trees are a windbreak, but he planted every one of those trees around his house for his father.
Oh, how interesting. Do you know anything about the parents and the upbringing?
Yes, in fact, I'm so glad you asked because
Or
There you
Barry's
go.
sister. And this is the area that he grew up in. And not far from here is where he went to school. But what's important about this particular area is all of these woods here go back for miles. And this is Barry's hunting ground. This entire area he knew just unbelievably well. And that helps us understand a little bit about how he thinks. In order to understand the hunter, you have to understand where he hunts. This house is very significant because this house is also where Barry would be under all that pressure from his father, where he would be told, get to the ball field. He would walk up this road to school, which is right at the end of the block here. And it was this house where all of that pressure would come. So,
Okay, so
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary.
No, I just the impressions that I get from that, and I don't mean impressions like I'm Sylvia Brown or something. I mean impressions like, psychological impressions. Remember her, Sylvia Brown, that pseudo psychic with the Wolverine nails. Anyway, so she was the worst. So look, when you are imagining a person growing up in an isolated place, you start to understand the value of one single person in their life, right? Like when you're living with hundreds of people around you, one person talking to you and becoming your friend is great and all, but there's hundreds of others around. When you're isolated, you come to heavily value anybody who comes along who is kind to you and connects with you, particularly if the person living with you has you under a lot of pressure and might make you feel not good enough. And you start to imagine a person who's walking around with the sort of social veneer of, I'm big, I'm, really big and important or whatever, but is quietly lonely and pathetically longing for connectivity. And those are the kind of people where the stage is set to find someone that you idealize, that you feel fills that void, and then abandonment by them is too much to bear because it feels like you're slipping back into, I'm not good enough. If I wanted that, I would have stayed home with dad, that kind of thing. So that you start to imagine a person who's going to be very sensitive to being told you're not good enough, and who has a kind of a difficulty connecting and having options of people to connect to, and gets overly attached because of the idea that you value so much anybody who you think cares about you. Incidentally, as one of those little bits of trivia that is very interesting, do any of you know what the name Morphew means? I'm just curious.
I do. I watched your show earlier.
It means murderer. Morphew is the Old English word for murderer.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, what's so interesting about it is that the family name Morphew, it derives from the person in the justice system who probably would have carried out executions. It was like a kind of a killer for justice. And so that it's just fascinating to me that somebody accused of murder would have the name Morphew. And that kind of thing amazes me. But I bet nobody else realized that. But that's where it comes from, the Old English word for a killer, a justice-based killer.
And actually,
Look
you
it
know, Maysville, before it was Maysville,
Mhm.
it was called Crazy Camp.
Oh no.
Crazy town?
Crazy Camp.
Crazy. Oh,
Yeah, I
my goodness.
researched it for a couple years ago. Yeah, and I heard it. I played one of my videos back today, and I went, "Oh yeah, it was called Crazy Camp before."
Really?
wow.
I think I live in a satellite site of with that. But I think that's important. That idea of isolation and probably overvaluing anybody who kind of seems to make you feel attractive and wanted, is very important, because I think with these kinds of offenses, if he's guilty, the key is attachment. Being too attached to a person that you cannot let go of and feeling humiliated that they don't want you has a very different meaning to that kind of person than it would, you know what I'm saying? The average person, you fall in love, you've got somebody on a pedestal, they leave you, you just kind of go like, you're crying in your beer, or you go out with your friends and you get upset and they say, go out and find somebody better and move on with your life. And that's the end of it. But there are some people who simply cannot, because it feels like they're taking it lying down. Can't
So
let that go. And I suspect there's a whiff of that.
I have a question then, if that's okay, about just because I remembered some details about Barry going to the gym and he would hit on the girls, and I'm sure that would stroke his ego and whatever. So I guess that's in line with that, right?
Well, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
clearly, when look, this is all speculation, but when you're dealing with the possibility of something being motivated by loss and narcissistic injury, right, the wound to the ego, you would expect such a person to be out in the world trying to be attractive and great and whatever, but ultimately harping in their mind on that one person that they can't have, right? So you picture, like, a person is presenting on stage and the whole audience is applauding and there's one sourpuss that isn't. That kind of person will follow them out after the show and say, how come you didn't clap? Why didn't you think I was great? Everybody else did. And then the person says, I just didn't like it. And then you start calling them up. I got to win you over. How come you didn't like me? Why don't you? So it starts to feel like that's the only person who sees the truth. And so you say, I've got to win that person over. I've got to have them. If I can't have them, it feels like I'm humiliated. They're the ones. It's like they've got my clothes off. I can't handle it. And, so you start to picture that kind of thing, that sensitivity being at the heart of this, I suspect.
And Gary, sometimes as you're far back, your autofocus.
Oh, I'm integrating into, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
No, we
oblivion.
just want them to see your amazing look here. At Paisan, just all that. Okay, so here's a question though, on this track, staying on this track with everybody. The pressure that his father put on him, the father did not put on the two sisters of Gary or of Barry. He had, his dad said that Barry couldn't, do no wrong. And this is all coming from people that we interviewed. But the sisters, Barry treated them like trash.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, on multiple occasions. And so where's that fitting into this dynamic here with the relationship with dad, distant with mom, but now mom seems to be playing a bigger role in his life, first defender, et cetera. And Karen, am I missing anything else based on some of the information that we discovered?
No, but I find it really interesting that these relationships. There were so many things that we learned that this this domination, domineering male. And Suzanne is this petite, as Linda said, this petite, small woman. I don't know. It was just really, really interesting to hear Barry's relationship with his sisters and his mom and his dad. We haven't touched on yet this, during high school, Barry had played baseball. He was like the baseball star in the small town of Alexandria, Indiana.
For the Tigers, by the way.
Yeah. The team was were they the Tigers?
Yeah, they were
Or
the
Lions?
Tigers.
Okay. I couldn't remember.
Lions,
So
tigers, and bears.
lions, tigers, yeah.
And bears. Yes. Oh my.
He actually
Yeah.
called himself Bear on his application to the Toronto Blue Jays. Was Bear, and that's where Bear came, because I started calling him Bear, but he actually nicknamed himself Bear on the application, if I remember correctly.
I love that detail, Linda. That's one of the many things we love about you. Just to pick up those little tiny little, you call them info snacks, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, another Lindaism. Love it. And so, we have this character developing again when Chris and I walked back and met the people who knew him. And so we've got this piece of this baseball hero out of high school, but yet gets to like the farm club and completely fizzles out. We're told it's an injury. Who really knows, And again, Gary, I'm thinking about just the personality type that you've laid out. We know that he's a hunter. He hunted his whole life. And so like, it's so fascinating. Like you start putting all these pieces together and then you kind of think about, well, what kind of relationship did he have with his wife? And, something that starts in high school 25 years later doesn't mean it's necessarily going to continue. We know that Suzanne was having an affair with somebody, and you just get the sense is just explosive, toxic, situation for her in trying to get out of that marriage. And of course, and we'll talk about this, I don't want to mix up too many things at the same time, but we look at Maya Maletti, who was also trying to leave her marriage with her husband, Larry. Look at Deanne Warner, who was trying to leave her relationship with her husband, Dale Warner. I mean, these, that Dale, or I should say Dee Warner, Maya Maletti, and Suzanne Morphew were all from what I call this post-COVID group of women who were trying to divorce their husbands. And now all three of the men have been arrested in connection with the murders of their respective wives.
Right. Well, in the New Evil, there's a case given under Category 9 of a kind of methodical jealousy-related murder, which is very instructive for the kinds of cases you're talking about. I would recommend at least reading about the case if you don't have the New Evil, which is the Paul Snider case, who was the husband of the Playboy playmate and actress Dorothy Stratton. Dorothy Stratton, like Suzanne Morphew, was something of a beautiful, very kind of loving, desirable person who simultaneously was something of a trophy to Paul Snider. She was a lot younger. She was making a lot of money based on her physical appearance. She was desired by men all over the world. And on the other hand, was also sort of the only person who was able to sort of talk to him on a deep level and make him feel humanized. And what happened is that when he discovered that she had entered into a romantic affair because of his horrible temper and his controlling nature with Peter Bogdanovich, the movie director, he lured her to the house and strapped her up to a chair and shot her in the face to remove the beautiful appearance that he could no longer possess. And after she died, because he had been photographing her for a long time for her, to try to get her jobs before she got Playboy, and then did that to her, one of the comments that people made was, first he shot her with a camera and then he shot her with a gun, right? So the idea being that there had always been that theme of possessing her through the instruments of, in some way. And I think that has to be distinguished from a jealousy murder that is more typical and impulsive, right? Like what the French called the crime passionnel, the crime of passion. That's very different. That's a situation where you come home, you find your partner with somebody, you pick up an object, you beat them with it, you shoot them, whatever, and it's totally impulsive. And the jury kind of gets it. They can say, look, if I walked in on my partner cheating, I could imagine losing it like that. But then there's a different kind of jealousy murder. That's what Category 9 is in the book, where your personality figures in and you've been so slighted that you say, there's no passion here. I'm not emotional about this. I just can't take it lying down that you have dared to humiliate me and don't want me anymore. So time is going to go on. You just go about your business, whatever, months, years, whatever, and the day is going to come. And then, like a hunter, with a lure, you're just sort of sitting there waiting, and then it's time, which I think gives such people a kind of godlike feeling. I always think that about certain types of hunters, that sitting up, in the tree or behind the tree and just sort of waiting. Of course, the other side of that character is that the person doesn't see you. The quality that if they could see you, they might say, what a joke you are, right? So you hide. It's like sort of godlike mixed with insecurity. And I think that's the center of this kind of a character. And so, Chris, this whole thing with the baseball and the father and all that, what's so interesting about it is you get the sense that his identity got wrapped up in being a winner. Right. And that not only being a winner, but that love was dependent on it. And he's got, everyone else in the house is a woman. I'm sure he longed, for one of them to, care about him. And so there's this kind of sense of I can't have that, and I can't internalize, what being a man is. And my whole identity is tied up in this. And if I'm a loser, who would want me? Right. So that you got to picture all of that in the background of a person's personality, and then the possibility of losing this idealized person in that context. It's hurting you on two levels. The level of you were the only one I thought really cared, and the level of you were my ticket to everybody thinking I was a winner. Right. So that it's a double whammy. And that's why I think the Snyder case is just so instructive.
This is so interesting, and yeah, it really is. I love talking to Gary. I mean, we could, trust me, I've known him for years. You just sit here, and it's like when E.F. Hutton talks, the room listens, right? I mean, there's just this amazing
E.F. Hutton,
gift that he has. He has an amazing gift, and which leads me to the second piece of this puzzle now, in terms of let's explore his growing up at the ball field. Right. And did that play into anything? But before I go there, if you're just joining us, Miss Linda from It's a Crime is here. If you've not subscribed to her channel, get over there, hit the subscribe button. She has an amazing playlist on Bear and the Suzanne Morphew case. And of course, Dr. Gary Brucato is here in the lower right-hand corner, and then my sweetheart in the upper left-hand corner. Any thoughts before we keep moving from anybody on the panel?
Yeah. As soon as Dr. Brucato, I'm sorry, Karen, were you speaking?
No, go ahead. Not at all. Go ahead.
When you were just talking, Dr. Brucato, about Barry, and right away I thought of like Suzanne. As soon as he said, remember the right beginning part of Suzanne, it sounds exactly like what you're saying. And maybe down the road, if it's okay, later on tonight, whatever time, I have a question on what you think about that lining up with where she was found versus what you think.
We'll hit it right now. Let's go.
Okay, we good.
Elaborate on your point.
Okay. So you're talking about his personality and potentially, and the potentially, and the jealousy. Mm-hmm. So what's fascinating to me is he seems like the type of guy who will hide what's going on at home, hide who he is at home versus in the public. So it's interesting to me that she's found out in the open. But now we know that she's been moved. So I guess I need to form what I was going to say. Do you think that he would, with this jealousy, with this possessiveness, even after death, watch where she is? Because he put cams on behind his house. He had a rifle when people were coming to search. He didn't go in the search, but yet here's this. And I think about this black and white picture. I don't know if you guys have it on hand or not, but this black and white picture of him in the doorway and Suzanne behind. And it just seems like the possessiveness and the jealousy. I would think he would want to, in my opinion, watch even after death where she is. And he even was in an Airbnb right after. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, in staging, sometimes one of the considerations is that if you feel that you're trying to draw attention away from what went on in the home, you would put somebody as far away, as you can from. It's also interesting that based on where he grew up, this is somebody who would be more comfortable in a wooded, kind of area like that, because people do have a tendency to want to do things that are risky when it comes to crime in environments in which they feel comfortable and that they have control. This is not somebody who would be afraid of that kind of. I mean, I wouldn't go into the woods because I'm a New Yorker, right? I mean, if you put me out in the woods, I'd be annoyed there were no utensils and I didn't have a placemat.
I'm in Canada.
I'd be irritated. I'd be, what is this? Like, I'm supposed to eat under this tree? Like, give me a break. Where's the waiter? Right. So, but I think that there are some people who are comfortable in that environment, so they go out into it. So it's all about, who would do that? What is the personality of a person who would? But I think that what you're picking up on is the idea that the possessiveness would probably, if this is the kind of character that we are, and he is guilty, what you're picking up on is the idea that the possessiveness would transcend even death. So the idea being that you have to control everything, including the narrative and, the whole, and while you're at it, you've got to make yourself look like you're a hero, because that's the other piece of this, right? So
Right.
I also think that what you're picking up on is the important distinction between what goes on behind the curtain, which would feel very vulnerable to such a person and humiliating, and what goes on out in the world, right? So that a little bit of the symbolism is something like, if I take it out of the home, I have control over it, but inside the home, I don't, right? Because you really get the sense of somebody who feels like an imposter and a sham. If you saw behind the curtain, you would think I was a loser. So, but in front, I have this inflated ego, and everybody thinks I'm attractive and a baseball hero and everything
A beautiful
else.
wife beside me.
Right,
And
beautiful wife on my arm and the whole thing. So that what happens to such people is that when the thing that gives them that feeling falls apart, it feels to them like there's been a puncturing of the entire inflated ego. It's a deflation. That's the whole thing. So how is a person like that going to try to pump the image back up? Well, first you level the playing field. I won. I can't have it. He can't have it. I can't have it. You can't have it. And then you have to monitor the image and how it looks. So you make it look like someone else did it. You go out in the world and you make it look like you're deeply horrified, etc. And so that, look, if he's guilty, this is going to be a fairly classic story of domestic homicide, motivated by a person who simply couldn't let go of a grudge, thought that he was smarter than other people, and played out a kind of methodical execution consistent with that interesting name, the deliverer of justice last name, and then does a stage job and got away with it for a little while, just a little while. But if he's not guilty, well, then we're going to be faced with the interesting question of who on earth would do this and why. So that's the other thing I wanted to ask, if while we're at it, is in a lot of these people, and it was certainly true in the Snyder case, additionally, as a mechanism of postmortem control, retain the person, and they are sometimes committing SA with the person. Is there a question of SA in this case? Has that been ruled out, of whether that happened at the time of? I mean, has that question been raised? Because it is not uncommon in people. Chris, you're nodding at me like that's.
Well, I think there was evidence that he was potentially chasing her around the house, and he may have gotten her,
like hunting her, in other words,
hunting her, into the shower area in the bathroom.
Right, because so it has a sexualized whiff to it.
And just to kind of add on to that, the fact that he paralyzed her, but yet she was still alive.
Right.
I mean, could you see? I mean, in your experience, you've talked to a ton of these guys as well. That couldn't you see that he's, like you talked about earlier, that he's controlling her to the ultimate degree, and he's taken anything he wants.
Well, let's put it this way. We don't know in this situation, but
Right.
in similar offenses, I have seen that. In fact, in the Snyder case, after shooting her, that was what was done. And the reason being that it was the ultimate way of saying, before you go to your maker, you are mine one last time. I'm wiping away any previous person you've had relations with, and that's it. And so that does happen. But of course, we don't have any idea here. It's just interesting when you make comparisons with other cases that this may echo. But it sounds, Chris, that with the experience that you have, the thought has also crossed your mind. Are you picturing something like her running around and he's shooting with that dart gun kind of situation?
Yeah, just horrible. Just horrible to think
Well,
about it.
And you guys remember the story he gave to the police. He said that, and this was a little bit came out in the indictment, they had a wonderful relationship. Remember, didn't he say on Saturday night they had a great relationship? They made love. I remember him saying, something like that. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, what really happened was, obviously that we know that Saturday evening, 2:10 p.m. or 2:10 in the afternoon was the last text that she had sent Jeff. And that was the last we heard of her. So I think, Gary, to your point, he wrapped some of that up in his cover story to police, touching on that. That's
very interesting. And there's always, in that sort of story, there's always the incredible idealization, of how fabulous the relationship is and how much you love each other. And I mean, it really, it sometimes feels to me when a person is doing that they're talking about the way it once was, and you want to get back to that. It's the idea like where it was before the fall kind of thing. And and you start to watch the person's face and waxing rhapsodically about how fantastic everything was. And it's it's interesting to think about. I also wanted to get a sense of what do we know about this other guy that seems to have been in the background. Is that something we're going to discuss? I want to know as much about that.
I'm going to put it on our list here because my list is growing. I want to get
run it over.
No. This is I don't know about you guys, but I'm sitting here going, yeah, now this is true crime and talking about, reality out there. But I want to get to his school.
Yeah. Okay.
And then through his high school years. And then I want to show you the contrast between where Suzanne grew up and where Barry grew up. And Linda, did you have a thought? I see you leaning forward. I didn't know if you.
No, we're good. I'm just
okay. Let's jump back into this. And if you've just joined us, Dr. Gary Brucato is with us, Linda from It's a Crime, and of course, Mike Karen.
I want to take you into the early development years of Barry. Behind me is Cunningham Elementary School. This is a school where Barry went from kindergarten to 6th grade. It's closed now, but as you can tell, this area right here was critical to his early developmental phase. He went into professional baseball, at least he tried to get there. He got dropped out of the minors. He just wasn't good enough at that point. But this baseball diamond that you're looking at out here is where those first years started. Barry would come day after day being told by his dad,
You can even hear the
practice, who, by the way, has been described as being extremely forceful. But Barry could walk on water, and his two sisters couldn't. But his dad would make him practice every single day, almost relentlessly. He even built a batting cage in the back of his house. In order to understand his intensity, you first have to understand this baseball field. Let's go take a look. Now, if you look around you, Also, you can tell over here, this is part of the area where he would also hunt as a young boy. I can still sense the children playing here, and I can also sense Barry taking this very walk as a young boy, not knowing that his baseball career potentially would not be his future. This is left field of that now lost dream. The 2 dugouts, the snack bar. Can't you picture it as a kid? I think we all played on one of these types of fields. But what's interesting is there's a tree almost where the pitcher's mound would have been. So how many times did Barry's father sit on these bleachers and watch his son play baseball? You just wonder. So one of the things I want to point out here is if you take a look up here, up the street, this is the area where Barry grew up. This is his hunting ground. Barry shot a lot of animals in those woods back there growing up as a teenager. Now, it's important to understand the behavioral aspect. In order to understand the hunter, you have to recognize where he has hunted. Well, this is it. He used to shoot raccoons as a kid. He would skin them and then sell them for about $30 a piece. This is really a fascinating part of Barry's personality and understanding what makes him tick.
Chris, did his father praise him for his hunting skills?
That's a great question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. When I was talking to his best friend, and we went around for about 4 days with his best friend, and you've got to understand this guy and Barry are like that, and they still are. Not they're not anymore because he knows, because he was also very close to Suzanne. That said, he said that he and Barry would go hunting, and he would go just to carry all the animals that Barry would kill, and he would skin them. Right after he killed them, he would strip all of the pelts off of them, leave the carcass, and hand it to his buddy. And his buddy, even to this day, when Suzanne went missing, he was one of the gentlemen that showed up at the house to look for her. And he gave me a photograph of Barry laying. Remember that one, Linda? Barry laying on top of a mountain, and he had gone up there and said, "He's out there somewhere. I can feel it."
Well,
and, go ahead.
No, forgive me. It's interesting when you deal with people who come from certain home situations that they're obviously eager to flee, and then they go and get involved in a situation that starts to feel like it was out of the frying pan into the fire, like they wound up right back where they started with the same feelings that they were escaping. Very interesting to think about the metaphor of baseball, because in baseball you run away from home only to try to run back to it. And that's kind of what you've got going on here. You've got a person that's running away from a situation, thinking, and then winds up right back in the same feeling that he would have had in the start. So such a person starts to say, "My God, I'm in a hamster wheel. I thought I was out, and I'm right back in the situation, the same feelings I had to begin with." So, it's interesting when you think about this. So you're looking at these beginnings, that detachment, the contingency of love on being a winner, the aggression as a mechanism of getting your needs met. And then you imagine how all of that just replicates later in life. People, it's unbelievable how people, you think they change, but they're just like they were, Funny thing.
Ladies, thoughts?
People have patterns.
Yeah.
What did Linda say?
People have patterns.
Have patterns, exactly.
People have patterns.
Right.
Yeah.
And they get very frustrated when they think they've changed them, that circumstances have changed, and indeed, you know, they feel exactly the way they did to start with. Such a person, if that's what he is,
You know,
such a
one of
person
the
would
things
not take that well.
one
Yeah.
of the things I reflected on while I was up there, he was watching the erosion of all the thing that gave him identity, to your point, Gary, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
He's looking at the baseball field, you know, his dad used to sit in those bleachers and now they're covered with weeds and
Yeah.
trees, etc. And was that, you know, a metaphor internally for him? Do you think that he's starting to, you know, not see himself as the superhero anymore? And so he tells Suzanne, you know, hey, we're leaving. And she doesn't want to go. She's gone through cancer treatment, right? And the next piece that we'll show is where her house, you know, she called it her house, you know, that she and Barry had this amazing, you know, raising the girls early on.
Right.
And then it just all fell apart. But do you think he sensed, you know, because remember that baseball field and his identity was everything up to that point.
Well, you know, as Arthur Kessler famously said, there's nothing sadder than the death of an illusion. And if a person is living in a bubble or a fantasy of being the best or whatever, and something punctures it, some people cannot handle that. It's actually not an uncommon personality in a mass murderer, actually. Very common in, for example, the type of person who would annihilate a whole family because someone's been unfaithful or something like that. What there are whiffs of in what may have gone here, we have no idea. But there are whiffs of is the type of person who would be motivated in that same way of that you see there. It's also not uncommon in the type of personality that takes their own life, except that if they're narcissistic enough, they won't. Right? So it's like, you know, I can't eliminate myself, you know, even though I'm hopeless without you, you know, kind of thing. Because it's more about dominating, controlling, and manipulating the other person than it is about true heartbreak, you know, that kind of thing. But so, Chris, yeah, I think that's what you're picking up on, is the idea of that kind of realization that one's identity is shattered.
Linda, thoughts?
Yeah, we see that even with him saying, okay, like, I can see him look at Suzanne and do the same thing. It's just like, well, if you leave me, then who am I? And you don't leave me. I'm the man.
Right.
And yeah. It's
Exactly.
not like the dating world. But you know what I mean? Like, I see that. And
Right.
yeah.
I think there's a kind of a toxic masculinity element to this. And you picture dad, you know, you're not a winner unless ... you know, that kind of thing. So, but that dynamic is extremely interesting. The internalization of what manhood is, difficulty tolerating the loss of a person you see basically as a possession, all those kinds of things start to come up. And then the other thing is how it makes you feel utterly paralyzed. Remember, if you feel that no matter what you do, you keep getting pulled back home by like a tractor beam of your parents, you know, psychologically, you feel paralyzed. So you have to make the other person feel paralyzed. And that's what it looks like happened, right? That's the symbolism is you can't go anywhere. You're a loser. You're trapped. You're humiliated. You're frozen. So it tells you something symbolically of how somebody feels, right? It's interesting. And the fact that you can manipulate them and pose them and do whatever you want. It gives you that, like the person's a marionette. Think about how this person might have felt. I didn't even have an identity. It was just dictated by the people who had me around the house, like I was a mannequin, you know, that kind of thing. So you start to get a picture of a person, how the person might feel. And what's fascinating is if somebody is narcissistic enough, they feel entitled to level the playing field. It's an entitlement, you know, like, what do you mean I didn't have a right to do this? They did it to me, you know, that kind of thing. So that stuff is interesting too. But it'll be interesting to see what winds up coming out of all of this, if adjudicated and there's guilt. I mean, to really get into the nitty gritty of this. But I suspect that we're picking up on a scent. You know, we're a couple old a couple old dogs here can pick up a scent pretty well, I think.
Well,
Gary, I would want to just,
Yeah.
to your point of this idea of wanting to level the playing field.
Yes.
One aspect, which is it admittedly far lesser of all the things that we're talking about here, but people told us that he was very litigious. He
Sure.
filed a lot of lawsuits. He had a lot of grudges out there
Sure.
of running this landscape business, this tree planting business. And, you know, that whole financial side seems part and parcel with this type of personality profile that we're talking about. So
Yeah.
that probably wouldn't surprise you, because I was just thinking like these details about the case that I think all of us have, you know, put in the back of our minds because we weren't even talking about this case for quite a while. Some of these
Yeah.
details are now popping back in like, oh yeah, I remember there were lots of lawsuits. That idea of being entitled, and if you can't have it, you know, if I can't have it, you can't have it. And I think that goes into this, maybe the simmering anger, the rage that's just underneath.
Right.
Would you
But the
say,
difference- but the
that goes with
difference
this?
is- Yes, but the difference is that it's not emotional. It's callous and done with a methodical, with a forethought. Is a very different kind of personality than the person who just acts out. That's the thing. And, you know, the average human being, jealous enough, could get very emotional, yes. But this doesn't look like that. This looks like and I always thought a fascinating thing about people obsessed with lawsuits. They're a special breed. But some of those people, you know, you almost think about them being preoccupied with the idea of there being a judge that's going to be the one who looks at it all and sorts it out, right? And you almost want to say to them, like, you know, like, who is the judge in your psyche? Like, who is that? Is that dad? Like, who's that figure that you're always dragging people in front of to try to prove yourself, you know? And so it's the idea of, you know, there's an authority, and that authority figure is going to be the one to tell me if I'm right or wrong, and I'm going to prove in front of them that I'm better than you, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm telling you, in this story, you can feel the constant eye of some parentified figure over you, telling you that you're a loser if you don't win.
that's his
It's
dad.
that kind of. I mean, it feels like, but I don't know. I mean, I have no idea, but it sort of feels like that. And then the person obsessively trying to be the best. You know, it's all I do. I sleep baseball. I play it. I walk. I talk it. I put it out in the backyard. And then of course the outlet of aggression that may have been there in the hunting. That's interesting too. If hunting is something you're good at that makes you feel like a winner, then you could see why that would be the mechanism that would be used in symbolically dominating.
Yeah, so let's keep moving, and then we're going to come back to the body where Suzanne was recovered, and I think this is going to explain what you're talking about. So,
Yeah.
This is his area. And if we come out to this road here, you can see the house down there where he surrounded the house, as you saw, with trees.
as a tree, as a
Kind of a
window.
barrier. That says a lot. That says a lot about his personality. Just absolutely fascinating. So I'm standing here where it all happened for Barry at a younger age. 1986, Alexandria Tigers. His father pushed him so hard that this ball field became a place of refuge for Barry. Think about it. This is the dugout, the home dugout, where Barry grew up. His mind, his intensity, his abilities were all honed right here on this ball field. And in fact, it led him to the minor leagues for the Blue Jays. And that must have been an amazing, amazing experience for him. But it all started at that school where we were just at, and then here at this high school, Alexandria High School. the tigers. It's interesting that tigers and cats seem to be a theme in Barry's thought process. Remember, in the behavioral analysis of people, of subjects, they go back to what they know. Yeah, I find it interesting that he interjects a lion or tiger into the conversation about Suzanne's disappearance. Maybe it's a familiarity that he had. If you take a look at the center field out there, the scoreboard says Tiger Field.
So every game, every high school event, he played, that piece of the rerun, Tigers, Tigers, Tigers. And when his wife went missing, the first question he asked, was it a mountain lion that took her? I've always found that fascinating. And the next piece here is his dad would not let him play football. He was afraid his father was he was going to get injured. And so I show the football field.
Well, that's what he was looking at all the time. You know, it's interesting as I look at this Tigers ball cap that all the kids would wear. Maybe Barry wore one just like this. But what's interesting is what's engraved on the inside. It says the game. Sometimes behavior becomes a game again. Is that what we may be seeing here? I'm not sure yet. Let's keep going. So let's take a walk. You'll see the theme here are tigers. Everything's about tigers. What's so significant about this ball field, though, this one, this is the one place Barry could not excel. And the reason for that is his father wouldn't let him. And that's the football field. Barry was denied an opportunity to become a star here. But he could become a star in the baseball field. But his father would not let him. He held him back for fear that he would get injured and would interfere with his baseball career. Isn't that fascinating that ultimately, though, Barry gets injured and it ruins his professional opportunities? I think it's fascinating that this football field represents a denial for Barry Morphew. So I'm standing in front of...
Okay, so before we go to Suzanne's house, I think I should clarify for folks, those that don't know, my background was criminal behavioral analysis. Dr. Gary knows that. I was trained in what they call BIA.
Sure.
But then you turn it over to that guy and you say, okay, here's my initial assessment. And I did this 4 years ago. I mean, Karen and I went out there, this video is like 4 years old. And it's fascinating to listen to you for the first time watching this, because I know that because I didn't tell you I was going to do this.
Typical.
I know, but I love the raw, the raw skill that you have, and I always have. But it was fascinating to talk to everybody. We went into the gymnasium. His name's in the, the trophy cases. He's all over the place. I mean, it's Barry Morphew. Okay? And then you get to that one football field and his best friend turns to me and Karen and he goes, his dad wouldn't let him play football. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, he was afraid he was going to get hurt. And then ultimately, the final rejection is he does get rejected by the Blue Jays because he got injured in the minors. And
sensitive to humiliation.
Yeah, right. So
because it feels like a soothsayer pointed at you and said, "You're doomed. You're going to be humiliated," and then it happens.
Okay, so I want to hear both
you're in the hamster wheel. They can't get away from home.
Your assessments. This is awesome.
That's the idea. Can't get away from home.
Linda?
Karen first.
I'm waiting to hear what you have to say.
In the background.
Like, what does Linda think about all this?
I can speak about the lion or the tiger, what you were speaking to. If we go back to the interview that he did, he talked about the mountain lion, but he also said the cat. And so right away, I thought it was his bobcat because he carries that thing around like it was his blanket.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Interesting.
oh yeah, the bobcat. The bobcat is big, big, big time. He would drive this thing like it was, little kids on a little Hot Wheels, like that. He would carry it everywhere, not just work with it, but he's
the
driving it.
tractor.
Yeah, it's bobcat.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
You guys call that in the States too, right? Bobcat?
Yeah.
No,
And
you're right.
we had heard, I don't know if this is true or not, that police couldn't search it. But I don't know if that's true or at this point.
Well, there was a hit on there before, and in the area, in the what was it called?
The indictment.
The documents. Yeah.
Okay.
But
interesting.
I always thought as soon as he said mountain lion, it was the cat that took it up. And he said also that it was raining that night, which we know, and it was really cold. But he said it was raining, so he's all concerned about the mountain lion not having tracks because it rained. In the same breath, he said they found the bike, no mention of the rain, and they messed it all up because they were walking there, but no talk about the rain. Same minute.
Did he know the condition of the body when he asked the question about the bobcat?
Oh, I'm sure he did at the time. Yeah, he had killed her. Oh, well.
No, I'm saying that if he had nothing to do with it, in order to ask the question of if a bobcat got to a body, you'd have to know that it didn't look like the person died in her bed. You'd have to know that something happened that looked animal. So what I'm asking is, was he aware of the condition of the body when saying maybe a bobcat got to her? I'm just curious.
Nope.
I mean, a mountain lion got to her.
Lion, yeah.
Forgive me. But I'm mixing up my predatory cats. But I'm just curious I'm curious if that was something that he would have already known in the timeline. I'm just
technically no.
That's interesting.
No, and because he said Mother's Day morning, he got up at 4 a.m. and he left, and when he got back, his wife was gone, disappeared.
Right, because most of us, if our loved one vanished, I don't know if that's where we would go. That something had happened to their body that looked like an animal got to them. I think most people would just be like, they're being held somewhere. If anybody has her for ransom, please, where can we send money? Where are you, to have your mind go to butchery that might make one think of an animal is interesting.
Well, that was
there was both.
That was
Linda,
and Suzanne's brother came to search, and then all of a sudden he's like, Barry, that didn't happen. That was not the mountain lion. And he went, oh, let's do a 25-second video talk about, oh, Suzanne.
And to your point, Linda, where he said, no questions asked, in my air quotes, come back, bring her back, whoever has her, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
Really? If somebody hauled off my spouse, there'd be hell to pay. I got a ton of questions.
Right.
I mean,
only 25 seconds though.
Yeah, 25 seconds.
He offered to pay some kind of ransom or something, that he was going to pay the person or something.
However much you want.
Oh, yeah. That's right. He said he would pay however much.
Nephew,
while shaking his head no. Yeah.
I want you back so bad. So bad. Yeah.
That's very interesting. The idea of what I have earned, the income I have earned is what is necessary to bring you back. It's an interesting little insight if you think of it from like a statement analysis point of view. It's like, if somebody is guilty of killing their wife and had the feeling that they were not good enough to deserve that person because of their status and their income and their power and whatever, it's very interesting and symbolic to say, well, now I'm going to use the money associated with my success and purchase them back. I think that's something like Steve Johnson would find interesting, Chris, from a
Yeah, we actually had him weigh in on this.
Yeah.
Okay, in the
Did you
the
find
print.
that line interesting, or you didn't get into
Oh.
that?
Yeah, no, it was yeah, no, Linda was all over it in the beginning. And everybody was like, what? Where's this guy coming from? But that's one of the cool things, with all of us being here, connecting some of these dots. And now we look back, they had a dog hit. We did not know the possibility of what that meant. I mean, we had a theory on it, we were talking about it, but now we know in the indictment, okay, where getting back here for a second, and then we'll go back to Suzanne's house, where it says there was a distinct lack of bug activity, which was inconsistent with the remains having decomposed at that location. So they are putting in the indictment, we don't think she decomposed at this spot. That's what this means, right? And then the clothing items lacked evidence of decomposition, which was inconsistent with Suzanne Morphew wearing the bike clothes at the time of her decomp. So
She may have. Do you think she was naked at one point while dead?
yeah, which goes back to
My point about the. Yeah.
I don't think he plays necrophilia. Do you, Gary?
No, not that.
No,
but I do think that
he's frozen in time.
Yeah, I mean, I look. I don't know.
Linda, go ahead.
I don't put anything past.
In.
But I don't think so.
Karen, jump in.
She was wearing a bikini that afternoon. Well, that's what her last proof of life shot was a bikini, sunbathing, and a towel, which were both not found.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here's the question, right? Does he throw the bike clothing into the hole, or does he redress her? I mean, both of those are possibilities. And I hear Buddy barking like squirrels out on the back porch. But I mean, so those are both possibilities, right? That he could have redressed her. Go ahead, Karen. What were you going to say, hon?
No, I'm just remembering something. Suzanne's friends or a friend, somebody came over to the house after she was missing, and Barry let the friend, or tried to give the friend, her bathing suit. Am I way off on that?
No, you're right. That's right.
Do you guys remember that?
Yes. Oh, well, yeah. So talk about creepy. So
Yeah.
when her clothing, we got this firsthand from Barry's best friend, and I also talked to the woman. She said when she was at the house and Barry was cleaning out Suzanne's clothing, he offered her bathing suits. And she was like, no, I'm not going there.
Now, we don't know if it was the exact bathing suit that she had on, and for what Linda mentioned, the last picture that she was in, photo, but it was definitely bathing suits or suit. So
from her,
yeah, I just remembered that tidbit from,
yeah, good
from
point.
the case.
Good point.
Anyway.
Yeah. So we have in here, it says the clothing lacks decomp. So basically, I think what they're saying is the clothing was either A, thrown in there into the hole somewhere, or B, we don't know for sure, but the autopsy report ultimately will show, because even in the autopsy report, it says fragments of clothing. And so that means clothing that is typically on the body that will also start to fall apart based on the fluids from the body decomping, et cetera. But here they're making it sound like the clothing items lacked evidence of decomposition. So that means possibly that the clothing was put into the hole as part of the staging feature.
Now, Chris, this I have to jump in for just a sec,
Yeah,
you guys.
please.
So indulge me for a second. This brings up a timeline in my head already. So when Barry, like the next day, right, takes the authorities, we see the police body cam of like that area, and like the bike was down the ravine. Okay, which came first, right? Chicken or the egg here? Was she, if she was buried somewhere else, dug up, and then moved to this Moffat County location, and he throws in the bike clothes, this would have been days, if not potentially weeks or months after the bike story already was shared with police and already a narrative out there. What do you guys think?
I'm wide open. I no, yeah, you're right. He's laying out this idea that he's sticking to it till it sticks. You know, the old saying, stick to it till it sticks to you. Go ahead, Karen.
No, I want to hear what Linda has to say. Linda, is this part of like a whole potential premeditation plan here? What do you think?
This is the interesting thing, because if she was wearing the bikini, the bathing suit last, but yet there's a random helmet off on the side of the road, just northwest to where the bike was found, right? But he also went to the manager and wrote down a description, not of Suzanne. Hey, my wife's missing, but you have the bike helmet and the shorts. So were the shorts, is that what it said in the indictment? That what they found, or they just said clothing?
Clothing.
I think they said clothing.
It's gonna be the shorts. Yeah. Whatever he said, the baby blue shorts or whatever it's going to be that, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Allegedly.
Yeah, bike clothes. It was inconsistent.
Right.
And which is that's a really good point, Linda, because he did go into that store and did write that note and said she's wearing this bike clothing.
No mention of what she looks like, her height, her weight. It's just, we're looking for a bike helmet. We're looking for baby blue shorts, right?
Yep.
And there was a baby blue shirt or shorts, one of the two.
Mm.
It's been 5 years.
Yeah.
And then we have here where in this new indictment says, additionally, there was a lack of animal predation on the bones, which was only a small amount of dissected soft tissue, which basically means the tissue had been out in the sun. It may have been mummified, meaning the fluid within inside of the tissue starts to mummify if there's exposure to the elements. And so on a few of the bones, and there was no hair mass located. So during the decomposition process, obviously animals would come in, you would have evidence of basically animals moving potentially the bones or eating the body there at the site. There was no evidence of that they saw. And then secondarily, the tissue in of itself had lost a lot of the moisture. So that means it starts to become a little bit more mummified looking, and because the fluid goes out of the body and it starts to turn different colors. But the most important piece, as if that wasn't enough, is there was no hair mass located. So with the skull, the mandible will typically fall off first during the decomp process over time. And then the animals will come in and typically they take the mandible away, or the larger bones, mostly coyotes, that kind of stuff. But in this particular case, her hair mass, that is really important to understand, because now you have smaller rodents, rats, squirrels, raccoons. They take the hair for the nest. So a lot of times when we would search in a body dump, you would start looking for, these small nests around the body, because the animals would move the hair like a bird. Even birds would take, parts of the hair, and then you'd find them, if you find nest, you may find some of the victim's hair within that nest, because the animals, take it. And so this is what's really important. It says there was no hair mass located. So at this spot, it's just her cranium. It's just her head, her skull. Her hair's gone. It's somewhere else, is what they're saying here. So, go ahead, Gary.
Well, I have to tell you two things. One is that, Chris, you know that one of the people in the foundation is David Rivers, who is a very prominent forensic entomologist.
Yeah.
He is somebody that, we have consulted with in super sleuths on cases that involve things like flies and larvae and things like that. He's somebody that I think would be absolutely fascinating to weigh in on this story.
Yeah.
Because that whole thing of what can we tell about a body and where was it moved and so forth is right up his street, as they say. And the other thing that I think is interesting is if you right now were to shut off all of our cameras and ask the audience what each of us was wearing at this moment, I doubt very much people would have paid very much attention to the color of what we're wearing or what it looked like. When you are in a relationship with a person or know a person, after the first few times you see them, you sort of stop looking at them that way. You just think of them like a kind of a concept. You don't meticulously analyze, unless they're wearing something really out of the ordinary, like a tinfoil hat. Chances are you aren't going to pay that much attention, especially if it's something you've seen them wear a lot, right? He was kind of wearing a t-shirt. I don't remember, that kind of thing. And I always think it's very interesting when somebody can meticulously name exactly what somebody was wearing, like the look, because it makes you wonder. It's almost as if they thought that was going to be an important piece of information that they were going to have to know. Remember I referenced the Lizzie Borden case earlier? Well, one of the reasons that they initially suspected Lizzie's uncle, who had visited the home, is that he was able to name the outfits, the clothes and so forth of every single person he encountered, including the person running the streetcar. He could remember the number on the hat and the whole thing. And so their interpretation was, why would somebody have paid that much attention to what people were wearing? Because it's almost as if they were trying to establish an alibi, or they would try. So I've always been very interested in that phenomenon. And it sounds like a big fuss was made out of laying out each, what she was wearing and what it looked like and all that. I find that weird. I don't know if that jumps out at you too, but it's just, and also to make that more important than the physical features of the person is also weird. I mean, most people describing a person, that's where you would start, right?
There's none of that.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. It struck everybody like, what? Right. There's a note. Remember, guys? I mean, there was a note with just her bike clothing, and it's like, well, that,
and baby
Blue
have it. Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't look right. That didn't. It's like, what? Where'd this go? And so just to wrap up this piece here real fast, in the indictment it says the forensic anthropologist opined that based on these factors, it was unlikely Suzanne decomposed from a fresh body to a skeleton at this location.
Right.
Yeah, keywords at this location.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So obviously she was moved from somewhere else.
Yeah. They hit the tennis ball and said, no, it's not on this court. It's on another one. So there is another gravesite that has not been found yet. And remember, there were partial remains recovered. So she's still out there in some places. And
sure you're not assuming she was buried in a previous location? She could have just been placed in another location where there was no burial.
Well, there were, and Linda knows, and I'm going to serve off to her. How many trees were there that bear? 5.
5 trees. Wow.
I do, 5 trees.
Tell the
Can I do a Linda-ism?
Go as
absolutely. Please.
Barry likes to bury. Oh. And I only say that, well, first, I think it's from Chris. I think you gave that information that back in Indiana, he buried a bunch of furniture and stuff in his yard, right? Is that correct?
Barry likes to bury.
Barry likes to bury.
Lots of stuff. And he had 5 trees.
And he had 5 trees. And Sorry, I keep jumping in because I get excited about this. I did a video about the body farm and how they were researching. Everybody's in chat here are going to hear about this. How they were researching the leaves and how they change colors, and how they were studying that, as you know, of course. They were studying the decomposition and potentially down the road to see if they could find bodies.
Yep.
Maybe
And
three.
Andy, her brother, was out on a search. And Gary, you don't know this, but Andy, her biological brother, was out on a search, and a dog, a canine, hit a tree.
Oh, I see.
Well, out of the bush comes Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Literally, they were up on a surveillance on this tree.
I see.
And they questioned him about, how did you know to come to this tree? And he says, I didn't. We were just in the area, and we had a cadaver dog with us because we set him up with some cadaver dogs from the foundation. And they, next thing you know it, boom, the dog went over to go to the bathroom. And next thing you know it, the dog is alerting on this tree. And the tree was dying, which is consistent with potentially something underneath it. Well, then we tracked that he had purchased five trees.
Chris glitched, so he'll be coming right back in to. I know, it's so weird. We actually figured out what piece of equipment here is causing that glitch to happen, and we ordered a new one. And of course, it's coming maybe tonight, probably tomorrow. So anyway, Chris will be coming back in. I don't want to lose you guys on the 5 trees here.
Right.
He's coming
I
back
guess
in.
that was 25 trees, 5 trees 5 times. My goodness. That's a lot of trees.
That's a lot of trees. Exactly. Hang on for a minute.
Screen of trees, yes.
Yeah.
My camera is spinning.
Okay, you're back.
My Garyism would have been that if he's guilty, he puts the Barry in barrier.
Yeah. And so anyway, we track where the job site was that he was supposed to deliver these 5 trees.
Right.
And then we get the receipts, and I turn them over to Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI at the time. And lo and behold, we then start interviewing a bunch of people up there. And one of them says, well, she's buried under a tree. And, she had been dismembered partially. And yes. And this came from somebody that was, who will have to testify at some point if he's still around. But so that was kind of an interesting piece of it. And so then we started thinking, holy cow, did he put her underneath each one of these trees? Because remember, in Indiana, and that was one of the reasons why we went back to Indiana, was to kind of do a suspectology in relationship to what's his knowledge base on these types of activities. And remember, guys, he had that bobcat with the drill, right? And he wouldn't let anybody near that bobcat at all. And lo and behold, boom, boom, pow, zoink, the dog hit on the bucket, allegedly, right? That there was a human decomp on this bucket. Well, now we have this evidence that has presented itself 5 years later that says, hey, guess what? She was moved. And that just goes into your theory, Linda, that you've been connecting the dots from day one, right? The triangulation. Tell everybody about that piece of the puzzle.
It was interesting because it was back to that interview, and Barry was very specific but odd in how he was describing where not to look. So again, there's a discrepancy where he would say, Let me get that because it's important here, and it has to do with the triangle. He said, it's important to, it's never going to hurt to retrace searches. He didn't say not retrace our steps. He says it never hurts to retrace searches. And then he said, we looked all the way around the mountain, but we're going to miss something. And what was interesting is he was telling the interviewer, which was Tyson Draper, he said, don't look in this triangle. Go up the mountain, even though we searched a bunch of times, you can go look up there. But don't look from your truck to the RV park to this road and the next road. And then when you map it, it turns into a triangle. So my theory was, go look in the triangle because he doesn't want anybody to look in the triangle. And then what happens is I made the triangle. I actually expanded on it, but it just so happens to be that the Morphew homes in the triangle, and then where he put the cams were part of the triangle. And at the end to the west was where he went and got his little Airbnb when he had his ankle monitor on. And the bike helmets on the top of the triangle. So everything was part of this triangle. And that's where I ended up saying the theory about this triangle expanding. And I said from the beginning, I think he'd move her, but I said she'll be in the triangle. And then what I also thought was, and this is what I asked earlier about the jealousy part, is he likes to control. So I felt like he would want to watch her even after death and see what was going on. So that's my triangle theory. I've said from day one, even though people think I'm crazy, but maybe not so much now, but.
Well, and then remember, guys, his buddy who was the firefighter. Wasn't there a fire in that triangle?
So I found the fire on May 4th, 5 days before. What was interesting is no one was talking about the fire, but I went, wait a minute, Barry's a firefighter. Let's look at the fire. So May 4th, I looked at it. There was a fire that started on just west of the triangle. And it was started at 4:04 p.m. on May 4th. And Barry was supposed to attend that. But on the CAD, it said it was human caused. But the call said it was by a branch on a power line. But it also lines up with Barry talking about men's clothing being found at a dam at Fusis, which is also part of the triangle. So it was like 5.5 hectares or something. That it's a bunch, but it was leading up to the death. So I thought, well, wait a minute, why is there a fire leading up? What's the plan on that? And anyways, the fire, the triangle.
And folks, if you're just joining Karen and I, make sure you hit our subscribe button, but make sure you hit Linda's subscribe button at her channel. It's called It's a Crime. And she has a whole play set on everything she's talking about here from day one. And so get over there and just binge watch all of her stuff, because there's some really good stuff over there. Karen, what are you thinking?
Now that we're bringing up fire, and I had forgotten. So for people in chat or people watching, if you didn't know, Barry was a volunteer firefighter at the local fire station that as soon as he and Suzanne moved to Salida, I'm off the top of my head, I want to say 2019. If somebody can fact check me on that. I may be off by a year or so. Am I off, Linda? Was it 18?
18, so it was shortly after that. It wasn't long after that. You're right. Yeah.
I'm dying to ask Dr. Gary, fitting into, we're talking about this personality profile. Tell me, when you hear that Barry Morphew was a volunteer firefighter at the local fire station, and this is a rural area of Colorado, so they do rely on volunteers, but it's not like he was a professional firefighter somewhere else, moved to the county, does it. So Tell us how that, just that one piece kind of ties in, if it does at all, to this personality profile.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, obviously this is all speculatory, but first of all, there are of course authentically heroic people that are drawn to working in law enforcement or taking, addressing fires or serving in the military and so forth.
Not scary.
Right. Right. There are people, authentically heroic people, but then there are some people that are drawn to those things because of several things. One being that there's a sense of belonging. It's like having a home where, you know where you stand, and you get kind of praised because you do this thing, and you bask in the glory of the whole group instead of, I'm not good enough. It's like we worked as a team, we were a family, and we did this thing together. So you can imagine somebody being drawn to it for that reason. You can imagine somebody being drawn to the heroism. You could imagine somebody being drawn to it because of the fearless, sensation-seeking, kind of thrilling quality of it. And you imagine an individual who it goes along with the self-presentation of, I am somebody who can basically arbitrate who lives and who dies. I can save lives. I'm a hero. I'm special. I'm whatever. And it's also interesting that, and I'm not drawing a connection here, but it's also interesting that, some people who have kind of psychopathic personality characteristics, but who have just enough of a kind of intact conscience, sometimes channel their fearless, bored, sensation-seeking kind of qualities into doing something pro-social, and under the right circumstances can turn them in the direction of crime. So you see those kind of characteristics too, so that it's not surprising, for example, to find out that, Ed Kemper was fascinated by police, or that Ted Bundy worked on a support line, or things like that. So you start to see that being drawn to the control and the outward appearance of those kinds of things in some psychopathic characters. So that's interesting too. But I think it plays right into the whole I present to the world as a hero, a savior, a strong man, the winner kind of a situation. But of course, as I said, there's all different reasons for it. But speaking of triangles, what was up with the relationship that Susan might have been having, online or whatever with another man? Because I think that figures heavily into this story, and I'd like to know what people know about it that's more than what is on the pages of the indictment, and how much would he have known about it?
Well, it was an old fling from high school. His name was Jeff, and he was married, multiple children. She was married, and Suzanne was going through cancer treatments multiple times. I mean, she was a survivor, and Barry wasn't there for her. And so she emotionally was looking for a support mechanism.
Right.
And one day they connected it via text messaging and social media. And they struck up a long-term or a distant relationship. And she was using WhatsApp and a variety of other apps to kind of cover where she was at. And he was helping her get through the place where, she was very, very sick. Barry went hunting while she was in the hospital and going through chemo multiple times.
See, that's very interesting, Chris, because it implies that the concept of losing her felt potentially like it was a personal assault on him. So in other words, I have to cope with the loss of her. I better go do the thing that makes me feel good about myself, instead of empathizing that even though this is going to feel like crap, I'm here for the person I love, right? So it feels like the loss is I'm the victim. The loss of the depending loss of this person is a tragedy for me. There's a fundamentally selfish reaction.
Right. No, and as a guy
Right.
who, my sweetheart, though, and I'm not going to make this about us, but Karen had a she's an ovarian cancer survivor.
Mhm.
And I was right next to her from day one, and I'm still here,
Sure.
29 years later. Okay. And so this idea, when I heard that about him, it was like, what a coward, what an absolute coward. And so I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, because obviously she's married. They were both married. It's wrong. Affairs are never correct. But there she is suffering, from cancer. She's got no support mechanisms, none, other than the girls, but they're kind of distant at that phase. And so she turns to this guy from high school, which is a great segue into, let's learn a little bit more about him, unless somebody else has another thought process before we go to that.
Well, no, I just need to understand to make sense out of this. Did Barry know about this affair?
Well, eventually he did, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, that's an extremely critical piece of information to figure into this story. I mean, because it provides a motive for wishing to eliminate one's wife. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So I feel that that's a pretty important piece of information.
And I think there's another. Go ahead, Linda. What we?
I was just going to add to the months leading up. Barry was also doing some unsavory things, like internet searches that were filthy and very filthy, and had to do with a 15-year-old girl and her hitting a certain base on YouTube, and Ashley Madison and a few other things. So there's quite a few searches that a lot of people tend to forget about these details.
After finding out about the affair or before?
I don't know. We don't know, because we don't know exactly when he found out, but it was, I would say, February, I think it was January, February, that these history searches were. And then leading up to Suzanne the night before, there was a bunch of Facebook messages to men on Suzanne's account.
Oh, well, that would add a whole other element to the toxic masculinity element of this story that is also intriguing. But that's another animal, so to speak. Okay, so then, Chris, let's see this environment in which.
Yeah, so it's literally a love story from across the tracks. I mean, Karen, what would that be an appropriate description here?
Yeah, let's take a look at it so everybody can kind of come to their own conclusion as well.
Okay.
Jump to your own conclusion, just like us.
If you just joined us in Dr. Brucato's book, The New Evil, if you've not read it, this is a must-have for your library. I know he's going to get Linda an autographed copy.
I would love that. Thank you.
Dr. Brucato has said, hypothetically, at this point, he's going to fall into category 9, 10, or 11. 9, 10, or 11. So let's see if that category changes based on what we're going to learn here.
Anne's childhood home. This is the first area where she would have seen Barry working as a young man who would turn the sprinklers on at the golf course. And up the street there is also the high school, elementary school that we just drove past. But the Fairway Estates, so this is where Suzanne grew up, with the high school here, elementary school, middle school. This is her home. Quite the contrast to where Barry out in the country grew up. There's no real hunting going on here other than golf. I just find it fascinating that these two personalities come together in this love story potentially gone wrong. You'll notice they still have the ribbons up. And there's one in front of her house as well on her tree.
As teenagers, on Friday and Saturday nights, Barry, who was the high school baseball star, and Suzanne, who was a few years younger than him, along with their friends, would cruise the streets of downtown Alexandria, Indiana. This is small-town America in the heartland. This city once relied on the automotive industry for its vibrance. When the jobs disappeared, the town's economy collapsed, and today, it's a former shell of what it once was. In this city parking lot, friends remember Barry driving his red Oldsmobile Cutlass with the windows down. He would use a single dumbbell to do arm curls so he could flex his muscles to be noticed by the girls. And he always had a girl with him before he dated Suzanne.
Well, here I am in front of Barry's house and Suzanne's home in Indiana. This is the house where they packed everything up, and then from here they moved to Colorado. This is the house the girls grew up in, where Barry had this open land here to hunt, to do whatever he needed to do. He had his own barn. All of these trees, he's planted every one of these trees, all of these pines, and this is really kind of an oasis for Suzanne. I mean, this is where she raised her girls and her family. This is where she would meet her family for get-togethers. Just everybody would have fun. One of the things that's interesting here is he's got beware of dogs warning, trespassing, you'd be shot. You can see those. There's so much of Suzanne in this home. These rocks speak so much of Barry's landscaping capabilities. This is the home that he sold and cashed out on almost immediately after Suzanne disappeared. This home represents Suzanne and how quickly he got rid of it. It's very interesting as we think about the correlation between the home in Colorado and this home here in Indiana. This is the place she didn't want to leave. I can imagine all of the great memories she made here in this particular home. It's sad. It really is. It's sad.
This is the area that Suzanne knew best. She was born and raised here. She loved her Indiana hometown and all it represented. She raised her two girls here. Her friends tell us she did not want to leave and move to Colorado. This is where she beat cancer for the first time. This is where her heart was.
So where I'm at right now is...
Okay, so that's Suzanne's piece here, where she grows up on a golf course. Her family is very successful in the community. In fact, they still own Gene's Root Beer up there. And it's one of the most popular hot dog stands in that part of the region. She meets this boy, sees him for the very first time, turning on the sprinklers, at the golf course. They end up, striking up this friendship, blossoms into young love in high school. He takes her out on the golf course, in the golf cart while he turns on the sprinklers, and she discovers, oh my gosh, he's the love. He's the big, baseball player. She's a very, cute, pretty girl. But yet on the weekends, he's still driving this fire engine red vehicle around this convertible top. And he's literally driving the car with a dumbbell like this, right? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Okay. And all the girls are like, oh, that's Barry. That's Barry, I can't wait till you two ladies are done with him, and, of course he's out there doing his thing. And Suzanne's like, yeah, but, he's my boyfriend now. And so they create, they fall in love. They go to school, he goes to school, Indiana, or Purdue, and gets a degree in agriculture. So basically, he comes out. He can't do that right away, so he's a fertilizer salesman. That he does that for a little while. He gets a couple of lawsuits going, makes a couple of bucks there, and everybody in the community he turns on. To all the business people, he starts building a successful tree farm. He is, picking up deer antlers in the off season, selling those, but simultaneously, he is ticking off a lot of the business people in the community, and they start rejecting him, saying, you're not the Barry Morphew we knew. Okay? And start pushing him, move along here, nothing to see. Well, one of the fascinating things here is Suzanne is also, recovering from cancer for the first time. And he comes to her one day and says, we're leaving. We're getting out of here. And she's like, what are you talking about? I don't want to leave. This is where the girls grew up. This is where I want to raise the grandkids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So that was kind of one of the first strings pulled out of the divorce story. Okay. But then I have a photo. I don't have it here tonight. I didn't show it tonight. He forces her, you're leaving. And we get this from Barry's best friend, who was there helping them load. Okay. But Gary, get this. You know what he puts into the truck of Suzanne's vehicle? He fills it with deer antlers and makes her drive it. Well, he pulls a trailer of deer antlers and garbage, and they're going to go sell the deer antlers on the way to Colorado in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And Suzanne's like, I'm not driving this truck with those things. Okay. Karen, remember?
Yeah, so the picture, we got to find it, and we'll find it for the next video we do on this. It looked like something out of Beverly Hillbillies. Maybe like picture a trailer with all these items, things haphazardly stacked way high up, wrapped with some rope. Suzanne was so embarrassed because she knows they can afford a moving truck. Let's buy a moving truck. Let's, U-Haul truck, whatever. But no, this was like you could see all the junk stacked up. So it certainly seemed like polar opposites here. And we should also mention that their oldest daughter was going to college out in Colorado. And so I think that was at least the stated public premise. Our daughter's going to school out there. Let's move to Colorado. But Chris, you're right. To your point, she didn't. And everybody there knew it, that she did not want to leave Indiana.
What are your thoughts, Linda?
It was one of those things. I saw your guys' picture, and it was one of those things that you just go, it was that bad. It was like, oh, what are we doing? It was so embarrassing. And then they go to not just a town, but a town of 135 people.
Right.
So they go from 5,000 to 135 people. And now she really doesn't have anybody except for him and the daughters too, but one of them's in college and the other one's young. But
and I think that's when this bonding started to really solidify itself, with her reaching out to her old high school fling.
And also Chris, I do want to say, because we didn't mention it, not only were there internet searches, but there's also in the documents that she would see Barry with his zipper down, and there were other things about infidelity on his part. So it's not solely on Suzanne's part.
Yeah.
But there's lots on Barry too.
I thought this was a visual. You just gave us another visual, of him doing this, and now it's like, okay.
It's just as cringe as as cringy as the same thing with his truck. It's, who does that? You're driving down and you're just like, hey ladies, how's it going? Like, no.
What? That's not attractive for you girls?
Right?
What the heck over? Okay, Gary, weigh in here.
Probably 5 pounds.
Oh, all right,
That was
Gary.
my inside voice. I'm sorry.
No, you're cool. What say you, Dr. Brucato?
I mean, I think that there are certain types of people who, as a mechanism of control, try to isolate you. And if you are a person who feels that, you'll grope for somebody to connect with to sort of pull you out of it. I mean, that's a behavior you see in cult leaders, for example, who I always say are nothing more than, people leading large-scale abusive relationships. That's really what a cult leader is. They use all the same techniques as an abuser. And one of the mechanisms of that type of personality, I mean, we're not necessarily saying he has this, it's just interesting to think about, is the idea that, you have to get someone away from people who might say, can't you see through that guy? Right? So you have to say, don't listen to anybody but me. Don't read anything except what I tell you to read. Don't listen to, and it has to do with that fear of exposure. And of course, that ridiculous Beverly Hillbillies card, whatever. What's interesting about that is that at some point during the mechanism of breaking down somebody in an abuse dynamic, first you have to win them over with the crap, the BS, that I'm fantastic or whatever. And then after a little while, after you feel that you've controlled the person, then the mask comes off and then you show them what you really are, which is sort of, embarrassing and whatever. But at that point, the person is no longer with you because of love. They're partially with you because they're scared or dependent on you, because that's what you've done. You've love bombed them. So now the person can't go anywhere. And when you become afraid that they're slipping through your grip, you isolate them and control them more. Now imagine somebody who, if that's what went on, imagine somebody with that kind of grip finding out that the thing that this woman that you're trying to control is actually drawn to is someone who has a kind heart and actually cares about you. That's the one thing you don't know how to do. Well, that's a problem, because then you're going to say, well, then I'm going to do all the things I have to do to assert that basically I own you, and that's the end of it. And but the paradox of it is that, let's just say, if we're right about a lot of things we're speculating about, the tragedy of it is a person who wasn't particularly well socialized growing up might not have known that the simplest thing in the world to do to make somebody want to stay around you is to love them. Love them and be kind to them, and then they won't go anywhere. It's as simple as that. It's like, I always say that love is like a bird cage with the cage open. And the person could fly out at any time, but they don't want to. They just stay. They like it there. You see? And so that, but trying to trap something, often sends it in the other direction. So I can't help but think there was a little of that going on, right? That it's that lack of understanding that that's what binds a person really. A person won't want to go anywhere if you love them.
Sure. Gary, to your point, this shows us how degraded their relationship had become. Suzanne went out and got a spy pen, and she was using it because she suspected her husband was cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the tables kind of turned because police found the spy pen, right, when they searched the home. And I mean, I don't know for certain, but Barry certainly was able to find out about Suzanne's infidelity from that spy pen.
Interesting.
Your thoughts? Yeah, your thoughts.
It's like, it's a fascinating thing, because in the mind of a controlling person, they're entitled to go out and do whatever they have to do for their ego. But if you do it, it's outrageous. But this is what in psychology is called projective identification, where you loathe in another person a trait because you possess it, and you view it as a weakness or an embarrassing quality of yourself. So you project it onto the other person. It's like like if I have a patient in therapy who never shows up on time, ever, sometimes that's the person who will say to me, I'll see you next week and don't be late. And I'm like, what? Like, are you kidding me? You've been late on time once. But that's a thing people do. They just literally just project it onto you. And I think with a lot of personalities, where you feel weak and paralyzed and pathetic. You just project it onto the person. I mean, that's the whole idea. Because, you know, being humiliated is like a hot potato. If your dad throws it at you, you have to throw it at somebody else. That's the whole idea. You don't want it. Nobody wants to be the humiliated one. So you go, he threw it at me, I'm throwing it at you. And you throw, yeah. And, you know, so, and of course, the most loving one is the one who says, fine, I'll take the potato. You know, let everybody be crappy to me because, you know, I just want everybody to get along. Because that's what people do. You know, unfortunately, it's not what you're supposed to do. Some people think that's what they have to do to make a situation better, is just let themselves, you know, absorb the crap that's going on around them. What I think is so tragic about this is that this poor woman, you know, here she is. What kind of cancer did she have?
I think it was bone.
Oh, God. So like among the most painful of cancers.
Yeah, it was excruciating. And then
God.
She beat it the first time, and then it came back, and that's what they found. They found the port, you know, in the gravesite. And that was one of the theories that was kind of explored early on in conversation. Did he inject that BAM into that port to paralyze her? Or did he hit her with the dart first, and that kind of brought her down? And now he has her completely paralyzed. And the affidavit here in the
right, it
says that there's a, you know, she got hit pretty hard because they found it in her bone marrow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. How awful.
Yeah, no, and that was one of the things. It's like, holy cow, is this gal, is, you know, to your point earlier, is she being treated like an animal? And if he has the capacity to kill raccoons left and right, and other animals, you know, I mean, this guy's not like the average hunter, right? Who's killing to have food and eat, etc. Okay, this guy's killing because he likes to kill. And his best friend confirmed that. I mean, he used to be at his house and he would shoot squirrels across into those woods, and then he would go out and get them. And he said he shot, like, one night, like 60 squirrels. I mean, the numbers were phenomenal. And he not only shot them, he skinned them.
Yeah.
And which is a good segue into the last piece of this puzzle for this video here. This is his favorite hunting ground right here.
Tree farm. Right along the lines of those pine trees there and along that forest line, and you see some of the stubbings of trees sticking up. So what Barry would do is he would plant the trees, and when they were mature enough, he would pull them up, and then he would use them for his landscaping business and his customers. Okay? This was his old tree farm, which is, he has since sold it, but this was his property. Well, one thing to understand about hunters is they have a favorite place of all times. Okay? As you can see this sign here, this area here is ripe for deer. But what's significant about this piece of property and all of these woods here, this is Barry Morphew's favorite place to hunt. This is his most significant area where he will go out into the forest and he'll hunt deer or animals. Okay? Now, interesting thing about hunters is when the hunting season comes along, they go out and they get their tag, but they also come out to the area where they're going to hunt, okay? And they mark that territory, okay? And then they'll come back during deer season, okay? And they tell you that they go through almost a physiological change. Their blood pressure increases, their pupils dilate, they get excited as they get closer to the hunt. Well, that's exactly potentially some of the things that Barry goes through when he comes to this piece of property and he gets out there by himself on the hunt. I ask myself, I wonder if Suzanne caught some of those feelings. I don't know. It's interesting, though, for sure. So this is
And the interesting piece of this also, so this is the new house post Suzanne's death that his mother buys, and he buys with her. The woods behind that house is his favorite hunting ground. You go into those woods and you can go for miles, and it's right now behind his mother's house. This is where his mom lives in Indiana now.
Barry's mom's house, and notice the woods right behind it. And those are the woods I was just in. So Barry can literally walk out and go into those woods and go hunting. So I'm here.
And this is his dad's gravesite, but we don't have to get into that. But everything around him, post-homicide, he reverts right back to going into those woods and continuing to hunt. And his best friend tells us, and Karen, you'll remember this, hon, and make sure I'm staying on track here with this. Barry would set his tree stand up, and he would climb up there, and he would wait for people or things to come by. And this person tells us that he would visualize maybe them as prey. What are your thoughts, Gary?
Well, I mean, I think that it's very clear that, or at least it would be a fair supposition that this is somebody for whom hunting had a quality of domination over other people, and that anybody that affected the ego of this person, is going to evoke that kind of fantasy of wanting to sort of, put the person down or go after them. I mean, not literally put them down, perhaps, but mock them or go after them or beat them or be better than them or whatever, so that everything is a kind of slight. See, it would be very, very interesting to know certain things about the social interactions of such a person, because with people like that, it's never like they have a perfect interpersonal record and then there's an accusation of a crime, right? With somebody who would be at this kind of place in the scale and the evil, they would have racked up a lot of little stories of grudges against people, having to show people off, down, be better than other people, getting into arguments, having a temper, not letting something go, being completely petty, having a hot head, being a little sexualized all the time and always needing women to pay attention to you, that kind of stuff. I mean, another common behavior in that type of person is that if the woman that you're involved with dares to have a life, like if she has other friends, like she has friends that are women, you insert yourself even into that, right? Like it bothers you that like the women could be saying like, what are you with this schmuck for, So you have to like pop up. You know what I'm saying? You befriend them. You need to know everything about them. And sometimes you say to the person, what are you friends with those people for? They're losers. Get rid of them. They're idiots. Or you have to know everything about where they were. Where were you? What'd you drink? What were you doing? What were you wearing? What, who'd you talk to? Whatever. So that it becomes a constant process of controlling everything they're doing. And, and I don't know if we know anything about that, about this personality, about this person. But I mean, Linda, it sounds like if anybody would know, I mean, you're in the weeds with this guy. I mean, do you know of him? I mean, yeah. Do you know of anything like that, of that kind of insinuating himself into, inveigling himself into any private relationship she might have had? Needing to, argue with everybody all the time and be better than everybody, having a hot head, anything like that? Is that pattern present?
There was lots of comments about that, but also in the documents. And there was a time where he was peeking in the windows. Remember that, you guys? And he was supposed to be coming back from hunting or something like that. He said he had to shower, so he didn't want to come in and smell or something to that nature. But they said it was creepy. Karen or Chris, do you guys?
At other women?
What?
There were, Go ahead. You probably remember a little bit more than I do on that one.
I'm not remembering that one specifically, but I saw in chat, somebody in chat remembered that when Suzanne traveled with friends, I think on the Florida trip, Barry showed up, right? Am I right, Linda, on something like that? Or was she with her family? I can't remember if she did a family
It
trip.
was her birthday.
Right. Was she with
Her girlfriends? It
girlfriends?
was a
It was like
girls'
a
trip.
girls' trip. And then Barry like had to fly in because it was on the like other, it was far away from their home. And there he was. And she was mortified, like so embarrassed. And obviously an argument would have naturally ensued on that.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about, because it's the picture of a person who cannot take it lying down if somebody is beating them at anything, and if somebody might be saying that they're a loser or talking badly about them or pulling you away from them or whatever, because everything is seen as winning or losing. There's a winner and a loser in every situation. And so the internalization of the idea of losing would just be too much for such a person. And that when you're trying to understand, when you start getting in the new evil, when you start getting higher up in the scale, motives become a lot less human and easy for juries to understand, because they start getting into the realm of the psychological and fantasy or personality based, and it's really difficult to make people understand something like that. The idea that somebody could view having a romantic partner as winning, and that losing them is a kind of losing in the game and makes you not a man, that kind of thing. And so what it sounds like is that for such a personality, the hunting thing is like a way of compensating for feelings of inadequacy or insecurity or lack of manhood or whatever. It's kind of godlike, something doesn't know when it's coming, that kind of thing. And it's the ultimate mechanism of control, because if someone doesn't know when it's coming, they live a paranoid existence, like having a WhatsApp and all that other stuff. That's the other piece of it. Why not just say to him, I'm unhappy, I love somebody else, bye. Why the hidden secret? It almost makes you wonder if she was scared of what the reaction was going to be. So where does that come from? Like someone's treating you like gold, you're scared of them for a reason.
And let's remember one of her final texts that Barry had. She says, I'm done with you. I could care less what you do. Let's just get through this civilly. Words to that effect, right, you guys?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. And so she texted him that. So maybe it took her a while to work up that courage, knowing the personality type that she's married to.
Yeah, but you can't have the last word with a person like that. It reminds me, once I saw a conversation between two people where one of them said, this is the very last time we're ever saying one word to each other. I'm never speaking to you again. And the person said, fine. Because they had to stick that last word in there. It was not possible that the other person had the last word. Forget it. And there are people like that. It's like, so, oh, yeah, you gone for good? Okay. Yeah. All right. See you around. See you at 8.
And God forbid that she goes and has fun without him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And knowing that she was, on her way to, to possibly passing away. It sounded, someone in the audience said that she had follicular lymphoma. It's just,
Yeah,
so
it was horrible.
That's horrendous. I just, there's so many things about this that just start to add more and more. And then think about the idea of, I'm taking something that makes you vulnerable. I'm supposed to love you through it, whatever, and I use it as a weapon. Like to use it against you. Like that idea. Imagine like the person who comes to you and says, I'm the only one who cares about you, and I want you to open up and tell me all the pains of your life. No one else cares. And then that becomes weaponry. That's some disturbing stuff right there. But that's a type.
Yeah. And indulge me for just a second. I just have one other thought about this. And I know I'm jumping way ahead here, but Gary, so I'm already in my head. Okay, we're at trial. I know we have a few steps to get there. If Suzanne's former lover is called as one of the witnesses and Barry's sitting there with his defense attorney, dun, 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 what is going walk us through what that looks like psychologically in the courtroom.
It's such a good point because it's so good of a point that you could almost imagine it being used as a strategy to purposely put a person there that's going to whip them up. Because if we're right about the kind of person this is, that you can imagine becoming overwhelmed with fury and nastiness and a need to condescend. And it's very, very interesting. You know, that's something that has come into my mind about what might happen in the Koberger case, for example. You know, that you purposely do something that makes such a person feel out of control so they'll explode. And then you can say, see, that's the real person behind the mask, you know, that kind of thing. And it's a great point. I think that's exactly the kind of stimulus that, if we're right about who this might be, that would cause a kind of nasty explosion, especially because the courtroom is another place that he seems comfortable. You know what I'm saying? So that's where you start to see who the person is behind the mask. And the other thing, of course, is you would expect, at least at first, a replication of what somebody like this might do in general relationships, right? So starting out presenting the I'm a good boy who never did anything wrong and I'm perfect and I'm a hero routine, where you're subtly trying to control and win over everybody around you, and then the mask starts to fall off and then you shrink, right? That you start getting humiliated and nastier and more angry, you know. And so you imagine that arc playing out in a courtroom, because the same thing happened. I mean, we saw that, for example, with Bundy in the courtroom, right? Started out, it's a microcosm of every relationship he ever had, right? I'm charming, I'm pro-social, I could never have done something. Like, next thing you know, he's screaming on the top of his lungs, angry, showing what he really is. You know what I'm saying? So you always imagine the arc of a person like in miniature, right? Like the way that there are encounters you could have with a person that will predict the entire arc of your whole relationship with them, because it just moves in the same direction. And when you see that, that's very characteristic of people who have personality disorders, because the person with a personality disorder never really leaves the script. That's the whole thing. So it plays over and over and over and over and over. And when a person with personality disorder kills, for example, in a serial way, it's like they're killing the same person over and over again, playing the same script out over and over again. There's a repetitiveness that has an almost traumatic core, like the person is stuck in one relationship that they're trying to beat over and over again. So imagine all these people that a person with a controlling, manipulative, angry personality is. They're all that same person who's saying, you're not good enough. You know, I have to, you know, and you want to beat them, right? And everybody in the courtroom will be that too. See? So that's a really interesting point you're making, is how do you pull the person into being that caricature of themselves? And that's how you strip the mask away. Chris, you've seen that in courtrooms, right? Where the mask falls off and the person just becomes what they really are.
It's delightful.
And
you're like, got him.
I know. And Linda, I have to ask Linda, shades of Lori Vallow and Kay Woodcock on the stand, not to mention Nancy Joe.
Nancy Joe, Ray Hermosillo even on there.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And it's interesting, Dr. Brucato, what you were saying too, about this being the good boy. So you see, on one hand, he's the good boy and the baseball player and this and that, right. And then see how good I am. I'm gonna sue $15 million. I'm gonna sue the FBI, the CBI. That's how innocent I am. I'm the good boy. Is that basically the?
That's part of the, you know, but well, you know what it is that's interesting about it is that with such, now look, again, we're just speaking about the type of person who would commit this kind of offense. We always have to say, you know, people are innocent proven guilty. Let me emphasize that. But I think that what's interesting about that type is that you don't know if they believe it. With the deception that's being done, you almost wonder if the point is like, this is how I want to see myself. I don't like looking at myself under the ugly fluorescent lights in the bar mirror. I want to see myself in the mirror that makes me look fantastic, you know, that kind of thing. Right. And such a person is drawn to someone who reflects them the way they want to be seen. And then if the mirror reflects them too honestly, they break the mirror. That's the whole point. I don't like what you're reflecting back to me. You're making me feel like I'm ugly and horrible and whatever. So I'm just going to smash it. And that's the whole thing. So what a person like that is doing is they're saying, I want to turn everybody around me into a mirror that I like looking into.
Right.
See?
So is that the same then too when he did his hearing? So in his mugshot, he's quite angry, but in front of the judge, it's
Yeah,
yes.
right. That's the way such a person might wish to be seen.
Yeah.
And want to see themselves. I mean, which is, it's interesting. Look, now, not talking about him, but when you're dealing with a personality, a person who has that kind of motivation, it has more of a narcissistic core than a classic psychopathic core, right? Because the core of it is humiliation and being angry at somebody who makes you feel the very thing that in your formative years you came to believe about yourself, and you can't handle it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a narcissistic center, and that's what we see at that very place in the scale that Michael and I talk about. Categories 9, 10, and 11 are exactly the crossover from narcissism to psychopathy, right? The category 8 is the epicenter. Well, 7 really is the epicenter of narcissism. By the time you get to 11, you're in full-blown psychopathy, and then when you get higher than that, you start moving into sadism. And this sounds like the kind of case we see at that place where a person has a narcissistic core and under enough stress and enough humiliation is capable of anything. That kind of case. And what's interesting about people like that is they don't have the traditional background of a psychopath. That, having been in juvenile delinquent hall, having been arrested 10 times. The history with a person like that is a pathetic history of like superficial relationships where you want people to say you're the best thing in the world, winning at things, needing, a lot of litigating crap, and kind of constantly trying to look good. Whereas a psychopath doesn't care about that. They're not interested in that, right? There's more of the narcissistic flavor. And so what's interesting in court situations is that in those kind of people, you get a lot of, how could he have done that? Look at all his medals. Look at his uniform. Look at his, that kind of thing. He's a Boy Scout, for crying out loud, that kind of personality. And you can expect a lot of that. Chris, you know that story, right? How could he have done it? He was helping an old lady cross the street. Right. Yeah, exactly. So that because there's this idea that, if you have no history consistent with crime, how could you have, But really what it is that people are not understanding what was underlying all that behavior. See, that's the whole thing. So that the change is that the mask has come off and now we see what was really motivating it. It wasn't that you were a Boy Scout because you had a big heart. You were a Boy Scout for other reasons.
For a reason, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, Dennis Rader was a scout. Dennis Rader was a scout. Right. I mean,
yeah. And Gary, to your point, what you just described, no former criminal history, but yet all this behavior comes out and it's taken out on the spouse or a close family member. I mean, add water and stir. Lori Daybell.
Yeah.
Okay. Allegedly, Dee Warner's husband, Dale. Allegedly, Maya Miletti's husband, Larry. Okay. I mean, it's interesting because you could almost put these as a true crime watcher, obviously not from, your forensic psychologist perspective, but it's like, is it the spouse who has a clean record, but yet all this manipulative, controlling behavior has been going on for years? Or is it a stranger like, Ted Bundy's out running around killing people?
Right. Well,
I mean, it's really two distinct camps in a lot of a lot of these cases.
It's the division of the personality into, the sort of private self and what you are out in the world, and the resenting of anybody that sort of reminds you what you are in private. Instead of, because like those of us who have had, in life have been loved. One of the best things about being loved is that you can show the awful parts of yourself out in the open, and the person loves you anyway, right? Like you could have a conversation with your spouse about, or your partner about, things that are embarrassing and gross and whatever, and nobody cares because they love you, and that's the end of it. But for certain personalities, that need to kind of make the other person think you're fantastic, it goes beyond the courting phase, and their whole life is like that. They think the person is going to think they're flawless through the entire marriage, like never know that they have a fault, and then you resent them. You resent the person who figures out that you're human and imperfect. And that's sad to me. I think that's the best part of life, is the people that love you not for what you are, but despite it. That's the whole joy of life, right? Is that you could be a jerk and the person's like, I love you anyway, right? And think how sad it is to be cheated of that. And that's the essence of this case, I think. If he's guilty, the essence of it is not having ever had a love object like that, and then idealizing somebody that comes along that you think gives you that, and resenting the idea that it'll be taken from you, because you can't let go of the idea that you don't have to earn it. There's nothing you're going to do that's going to make the person stay because you're forcing them to. And that's the tragedy, is that, and he brought about, if he did it, he brought about her being gone. And, and so now what's left? The hollow shell of, being alone. Well, and that's the way it works, right? You try to escape home, you run right back to it. Like the baseball.
I have a proposal.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we've been here for 2 hours and 42 minutes, and the time has flown. Okay.
It's been really interesting, actually.
It's fascinating.
I want to see how true it all turns out to be.
Our problem is we could all sit here for another 4 or 5 hours, and but,
and we'd want to. The bird cage is open, and we still stay.
Okay, but let's do this. Let's do part 2 at It's a Crime.
I would love that.
On Linda's channel.
How fun would that be?
We go over the.
Can we invite ourselves over, Linda?
Yeah, welcome, Matt.
When Linda can put up with us over there.
I love it.
Yeah. So here's one question though for you, Doc.
Yeah.
It says, Dr. Brucato, please explain the difference between the Hunters, BK, Rex, and Barry. Thanks.
Well, the Rex Hoyerman case, of course, is not adjudicated yet, and the the first one was Dennis Rader, BTK.
No, BK.
No, BK.
Oh,
Brian.
BK. Oh, I'm sorry, I read it too quickly. You mean Koberger, also not adjudicated. No, I mean, 3 completely different personalities going on here. If you were to place them, if they were all guilty on the scale, there's no comparison between them. Rex Hoyerman, if guilty, is a torture murderer who would be all the way up in category 22, where the motivation was sexual gratification from torture and control and domination of people. If Koberger is guilty, I think he'd be a 16, where the idea is the mechanism of control is not overtly sexual because you feel inadequate, probably. So it's all about domination through being smarter than other people, domination through watching them without their knowledge, possibly domination through, murder. And there's a kind of vague sexual quality. And in this type of individual, there isn't the repetitive quality that's present in potentially in the Hoyerman case. It's more like, the repetitive quality of killing, for example. And there isn't overt torture of multiple people over time in a torture dungeon kind of situation. But there is a kind of an aberrant personality, probably, or possibly present, where somebody is motivated by, humiliation and desire to level the playing field. That the one thing that each, I think, if they are all guilty, what each would have in common is that at the center, it's like one of those analogy games. At the center of each of them is some different way of pathetically dealing with feeling rejected and humiliated. And each of them would exemplify a different level of awfulness in terms of how one goes about doing that. And, you would place them at all different places on the scale. But that core thing would be the commonality. I also think that in Hoyerman, there was probably, if he's guilty, some literal hunting. Getting aroused by, kind of chasing somebody around or things like that, right? So and I don't believe that. I think there was a hunter-like quality possibly in Kohberger if he's guilty, in the sense of identifying one's prey and kind of learning all about them, studying them meticulously. But that personality is much more like a scientist that wants to understand a situation and an object and how to control it perfectly. Is a little bit different because and in this kind of person, I think it has more to do with a reaction to loss.
Go ahead, Linda. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I have a question, Gary.
Yeah.
Who's going to get more fans, Brian Kohberger or Barry Morphew?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think that in order to understand the appeal of Kohberger, you have to understand the idea that he was viewed as a social loser. And so he pulls for the person that says, you misunderstand him. I understand him. He was brilliant and attractive and whatever. Barry Morphew is somebody who tells you he thinks he's fabulous, that he's whatever, right? So you don't have that same quality of like, I have to be different than the herd by liking him, that kind of thing. And I think that's a little bit of what goes on with Kohberger, is the identification with him as the misunderstood outsider who happens to be, he's the outsider, but he's smarter than everyone, that kind of thing. Whereas Morphew, it's like I think people don't want to like him because he's trying so hard to prove that he's likable that I think that it comes across to people as, what are you trying to sell me here? That kind of thing. Now, I suppose there are people who may develop hybristophilic attractions, that happens to everybody. It sometimes even happens vicariously, like being attracted to a person because they've been near crime. I mean, I know people in the true crime world, and that's a phenomenon one day I'm going to write about, is that there are people who, just because they're in the world of true crime and touch, shake the hand of a criminal, become an object of fixation to a person, like as if they're like secondhand, we're near a killer, that kind of thing. That happens too. So, but yeah, you could develop that kind of hybristophilic attraction. But if I had to make a prediction, I think Kohberger would have more of a obsessive fan base than Barry Morphew. I think Morphew is somebody who would evoke more disgust, would be my prediction in people. And I don't think he would have the Ted Bundy-ish charisma going on. Doesn't he evoke that more? Like Linda, like I said, you're in the weeds with him. I mean, are you charmed by him?
No, absolutely not.
I mean,
But
of course, I'm saying,
it's one of those things that it's like apples and oranges. But with Barry, I speak from the female version of being in the dating world. He would be more akin to like, oh hell no, stay away from that guy. He's an F-boy, and that's what the term is.
Right. That he would give off the vibe that he was full of himself and thought that he could have anybody he wanted. Right. So he wouldn't evoke for that protective. He wouldn't pull for like, I want to protect him from people talking badly about him or misunderstanding him.
Yeah, he's
like
the guy, like in the gym where you're like, I'm going to be over on this section, and if he goes on that section, I'm going to cross the section. That's how he gives off that kind of vibe. Whereas Brian Kohberger, is different. It is just different. I can see why people are like, what? I don't get it. Like in their mind, they're going, he's going to school and he's doing all this. Why did he do it? How did it? So I can see how they're doing that, but it's completely different. Like when you look at Barry, honestly, from a woman's point of view, maybe Karen can chime in or not. It's just like, yeah, no, I'm not going on a date with you. I don't even want to look at you. Don't ask me for my number. Don't even say hi. Like that.
But Kohberger is more of a nerdy person.
Yeah, and he doesn't give off. I mean, it's different kind of a energy off of him.
He's like like cosplay Comic-Con vibes. He doesn't have like right. Who's hitting everybody in the bar, with the stack of beer hat on.
Yeah, he's reading the books and he's not going to the gym. Yeah,
he's got a nerdy kind of thing going on, and I think that that pulls for something in certain kind of people. And then you get those people that are right between those two types, like Mangione. You know what I mean? Like, you could sort of see, girls thinking he, but at the same time, like, there's this sort of dork, I'm a superhero, avenging, whatever kind of pathetic quality going on there too. And so, and it pulls for something in certain types of people. But I think the center of it for some people is that they like to be contrarian. And Kohberger is one of those people who's like an emblem of being contrarian, like being the smartest person in the room. You believe every stupid story, because like you just want to be contrarian. Yeah, it's possible. He was out looking at the stars. Come on. You framed him. And you're sitting there going, like, yeah, like, come on. But it's like it pulls for all that kind of thing, because it's the whole idea of like he's an emblem of you misunderstand him and yeah. Like, so that kind of thing. But with Morphew, I don't see him that way. I think people just kind of see him as full of himself and aggressive. And I mean, maybe that's just me, but that's how I would perceive him.
So
not a desirable trait in people. Yes.
So now that Barry's in custody,
yeah, right,
for allegedly killing Suzanne, what happens in the crime drama scenario now? There's kind of a dilemma now, because you've got Brian Kohberger in custody and he didn't do it. And now you've got Barry in custody, and they're going to the Krama stuff. They're gonna say, well, he didn't do it. So are they going to fight among each other? What's going to go on? What do you think? Because now there's a dilemma, because you've got 3 really high profile people that have been charged with murder. And so you're going to have to split your allegiances to somebody or something. I think that's going to be interesting to watch happen in the true crime community. Just my 2 cents.
Well, I think that you have to have something to identify with in the offender to fight for the fantasy that, they're being framed and whatever. And the problem is that Morphew strikes me as somebody who did such a good job of proving the point that he was better and different than everybody else that there's nothing left to identify with. I mean, Kohberger, what people identify with, I think, out there is this whole idea of like, I'm smarter than everyone else in the room. That kind of, or he's like the misunderstood nerd. That it pulls for people. I mean, you ever see the people that are obsessed with Kohberger? I mean, they look like they would have eaten lunch with him. They look like they would have gotten together in the room and talked about all the authority figures that just, you know what I'm saying? It's a type. You know what I mean? They're connecting the on the conspiracy board.
And there's a type for Barry. There's a type for Luigi.
Right. It's a type.
But now they're all kind of in the same arena right now, where all 3 of their personality types are.
Yeah, but they're very different types. They're very different types. That's just it. I mean, look at Heuermann. Yeah. You see anybody sitting around innocent Heuermann? Whatever. Nobody can identify with the guy. I mean, that's the whole thing. Right. You have to have something. And Mangione, believe me, there are a lot of people who want to identify with him because he was privileged. They think he's so, spectacular looking or whatever. So they want to identify with him. They see him like a Batman figure. They romanticize him. They see him, and they made a Broadway show out of it, for God's sake.
Well, and you talked about Brian dressing up as Bundy as cosplay.
Cosplay, right.
Behind the scenes.
The costume.
I can let that, oops, but I'll just tell everybody that when we'd had private conversations.
Yes, I call that cosplaying Bundy. Yes, exactly. That was my phrase. Yes, that's a Garyism. But he cosplayed Bundy. Yes. So, but that's what I'm saying. I think it has something to do with who you identify, and it's. I mean, even with Bundy, it makes me sad. You get these men that like are attracted to the idea that he took all the rules and the convention about politeness to women and not being entitled to them or whatever, and threw them aside and came in like Jesse James and took what he wanted, and they think that's like something to look up to. Social convention, us to throw it out the window, take what you want. Like that's like a sign of masculinity or something, that kind of thing. So it's always interesting to think about, like, what killer is somebody like obsessively drawn to? And what does that say about the person's personality? That's an interesting thing. You know, so it's like if someone tells me they like true crime, it's the first thing I ask them, what's your favorite case? Tells you a lot about their personality. You know what I mean? So
Well, and also I think people are drawn to true crime for, at least for women, it's either you've been a victim yourself or your biggest fear is to be a victim.
oh
And
yeah,
you want to figure out what you have to do to stay not a victim. So,
of course.
you know, there's that too.
There's that true. That's true.
And you can be disgusted with all of these killers that some alleged.
Oh
these
yeah,
alleged killers on trial.
Disgusted
And
by,
it's-
but not fascinated. Yeah, right.
Right. And it's
Not
got to be a
worship.
very small number, very infinitesimal number of hybristophilia people, but
God, yeah.
they capture attention.
Absolutely, and some of those cases are deeply pathetic. I mean, remember Doreen with Richard Ramirez? She swore that he looked like John Stamos. She was obsessed with the idea that he looked like John Stamos on the cover of Tiger Beat with the curly hair. I mean, did she look at him with the corroded teeth and the halitosis and those beady eyes and all she saw was a guy that could be on the cover of Tiger Beat. You know, it's a fascinating thing. But I think hybristophilia though is more complicated, because hybristophilia, I think, is about a predictable relationship with a person that will never leave you because they're in a cage. They're not going to cheat on you, with another woman, if it's a guy that you're obsessed with, and you always know where they are, and they think the world of you because no one else cares about them, that kind of thing. And then there are the types that want to bask in the glory of the case. They wind up in the biography of the killer because they were the one who, there's that type. But hybristophilia is a fascinating phenomenon, but I think it's a little different than what you see in some, because hybristophilia is a disorder where you are aroused pathologically to the point, by an offender, that you could only be with an offender. Everybody else would bore you. This is like a vague version of that, where you're just weirdly fascinated, but like you could still have a normal partner, that kind of thing. But I think it's a common phenomenon and a fascinating one. But anyway, but I really want to thank you guys for inviting me on, and on the show. And it's been so nice to meet you, Linda. I've got to check your show out, and I hope that people will check out the Categories in the New Evil to see what sort of jives with their own sense of things. Obviously innocent until proven guilty, but this is one of those cases where it would be very difficult to understand what the motive of anybody else would be. Like, what's the explanation if it isn't that? Like, what are we suggesting happen here?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have to do that kind of thought experiment, right? Like we did. Remember when we did that thought experiment, Chris, with Koberger?
Yep.
It's like, okay, he's out looking at the stars. So then what? Like a drone picks up the sheath with his DNA on it and brings it to the house? Like, do the thought experiment. So doing the thought experiment, what would be the alternative explanation?
The mountain lion and the bobcat visited a 135 population town of Maysville, formerly known as Crazy Camp, and decided to kidnap Suzanne, chuck a bike helmet on the side of the road while you're driving, going, oh, we don't need that, and then just keep going.
Well, there you go.
Touche.
So good.
Sounds believable.
Okay, so we'll reconvene the group here at It's a Crime. Linda, you set it up. Give us the invites, and then
Yes, all of you are welcome to come on my channel.
We are so grateful that you cut some time out of your schedule tonight too.
Thank you,
Linda, to come over here.
Thank
and
you. It's
and
been
of
so
course,
fun.
Barry, you're always amazing. I mean, as well. And then Karen, any thoughts as we close out here, honey?
You know what? To be continued. We're going to continue to have a lot to talk about as
3
this
hours. We
case
had over 40, almost
winds
4,500
through the
people in here.
system. Yes.
So
Thanks, everybody. If you made it this far with us, we're grateful. But
Yes,
thank
and if
you all
you've
for
not
being here. Thank
subscribed
you, Gary
over
and Linda.
Linda's house, get over there and
Thank you.
hit that subscribe button. Are you
Yes.
guys ready to go to Hawaii?
Yes.
We are.
Okay, here we go. Good night, everybody. We're so grateful that you're always with us, and we just pray that you continue to take care of each other, and always remember that kindness is not weakness, it is a strength, and please pass it on. So aloha, have a good night, take care of yourself.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away.